Hi, sports fans everywhere. This is James Ead of this Ead Foundation. Today we're bringing you the Grandmaster games from, or the Grandmaster Norm games from the Mission 360 Bay Area Chess Tournament that's being held in San Jose, California right now. And we have a group of players that are competing for norms or to raise their FIDE rating so that they qualify to receive an IM title or a GM title, or at least a norm for one of those titles. And what we're going to do is once they start moving the pieces, I am going to share my screen and bring you the action live. The moves have not been started right now, so it's just me looking at a blank screen. But it's 4 o'clock start time, so we expect at any time we're going to be bringing some of the live action to you. I can tell you that so far things have been shaping up very well, but maybe just a little bit short of requirements. The exception is Robert Shantenko, who Shaletenko, if I butcher your name, I apologize, Robert. He's an FM now, but he looks like he's gotten his IM norms. He's trying to raise his rating, which is 2385 to 2400, which is the minimum requirement. And he seems to have been able to accomplish that by scoring a bunch of points, including if I'm not mistaken, he may have a round 8 win. Let me check round 8 stats. Yeah, he got a win in round 8, which puts him, let's see, he's number 5 on this list. Should it be at 5.5 out of 8? A tremendous score. So we want to give it a little tip of the cap to Robert. I'm going to add my friend Nick DeFermian to the screen right now. Nick, hi, are you ready to join me?
Yeah, I'm here at the Mechanics Institute.
Okay, and you managed to get the link. I just noticed your text that said it only works. I sent it to you on your phone, but did you get it? You must have gotten it because you're on now.
Yeah, that on my phone. I'm on my phone. Yes. So.
Oh, okay. I sent you an email as well, so I.
Right. Then I can. Which is better.
Yeah. So, anyways, get yourself comfortable. And I'm going to be sharing screen once the moves start coming in. And until then, you say you're at the Mechanics Institute. Where is that, Nick?
It's 57 Post Street, downtown San Francisco. Oldest chess club in the United States.
Oldest chess club in the United States. Is it the Marshall the oldest? No. The Mechanics was before the Marshall?
Mechanics was before the Marshall, yes.
Wow.
Civilization.
Aha. And it was out west, and they started up the Mechanics Institute. And now, what's that?
What's the institute?
Yeah.
Well, it's mostly, it was a library. Of course, in the old days, it was, the education in the rough gold rush era days. And so all the miners and people, they needed to learn things. So it held books, which were, worth more than gold, because people could start to build things and make things. And it was it helped develop the University of California. So the glory days of the Mechanics Institute, of course, that was, not last century, but the century before. But it was a very important place then. And now it's developed into a cultural institute in the prime heart of San Francisco. So a great place for anybody visiting to come down and see.
Well, I think I know Post Street pretty well. That's right in the heart of the financial district of San Francisco. Is that not right?
Yeah, financial district where it meets Market Street.
Right. And Market Street, of course, is the main drag going down through the middle of San Francisco. I've been there You could tell. And the institute was formulated in, like you said, the gold rush is famous for like 1849. Well, San Francisco Mechanics Institute was established in the 1850s, I think, right?
Yeah, 1854.
1854. Okay, I didn't have the exact number, but I got no decade. And because like you're saying, people are coming out. They wanted to get their fortune by finding gold, but you needed equipment in order to do that. In order to mine, in order to transport, and a lot of people came out there without that knowledge. So the Mechanics Institute was established, from my reading about it, anyways, to train people, to teach people, and so then as you said, the educational experience became its primary mission. And it's a 501c3 charitable institution, and it's been helping people learn ever since. But even back in the 1850s, they thought chess was an integral part of their cultural and educational experience.
Yes, they were smart back then. That was it was the place to come and be, and
Yeah.
they didn't allow women in those days when it started.
What? I'm sorry, you broke up on me there, Nick. I couldn't quite hear you. But there were some long-standing issues. I think I visited the Mechanics Institute, and there was a men's room, but not a women's room.
That is recently as the 1980s. On the fourth floor where the chess club is, there's the men's room, but the women had to go down to the third floor. So they remedied that, fortunately.
Progress. Not perfection, but progress. We're still working on getting everything equitable, everything right. But the as you mentioned, it was part of the UC Berkeley system, and for a long time, if I remember correctly, I know that John Donaldson wrote a history of the chess room, and I think he said that for a while the regent was a member of the trustees or in control of the trustees of the mechanics.
Yeah, the Mechanics Institute had a vote on the Board of Regents for University of California. That unfortunately went away during Ronald Reagan's term as governor.
Okay.
Maybe he wasn't such a chess fan.
Yeah, apparently, I would not have associated, but we did have a governor of California that did play chess, Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Ah, yes. Yes, Arnold.
Yeah. And he's also given an appeal that's just wonderful. He's done it in Russian to the Ukrainian, in support of the Ukrainian people, telling the Russian people, gosh golly, you're not hearing the truth. And you can believe me. Apparently, he's a big star in Russia. And so that was a very powerful, because I'm wearing the yellow and blue. I don't know if the colors are coming across, but in support of Ukraine too. So this is another thing. We want to talk a little bit about Ukrainian players, Russian players, because the FIDE motto is we're one family. We all want to be supportive of these players. And of course, the tragic circumstances that are going now are all over the newspaper and the news shows. But there's also, it also impacts the chess world to some extent. Like, for example, we can't, right now, we're not holding any chess tournaments in Russia. Is that right, Nick?
Yes, the FIDE won't allow that. And the strange thing is the president of FIDE is Russian, former deputy prime minister of Russia, and he's actually come out against the war, which is, very risky.
Yeah, you would think that's a no-no.
Yes, since Putin was branding those people traitors and scum.
I guess it would be a yet.
Yes. Yeah.
That takes some real courage to come out, and when there's consequences to be experienced. So Let me just check. I see no current games live yet. I wonder if I am getting the feed. I'm going to check with Tom Langlin. Tom Langlin is the president of Cal Chess, the Northern California state affiliate to the U.S. Chess Federation. So he's also the tournament director here. And I'm going to message Tom right now and see and tell him that the moves are not coming through. Maybe I need to refresh my screen or something. Wouldn't it be embarrassing if it was user error? Not embarrassing for you, Nick, but for me.
Yeah, I do it so often. I've just gotten used to it.
That's what it was, Nick. Okay.
User error. Well,
User error. So I'm going to share screen now. And if I can do this, my producer is not helping today. He's barking orders, but he's not helping me do anything. Okay. Let me see. Does this come through, Nick?
there we have chess.
Okay. So this is great. All right. So we're on the side of the board. So this is board one. Eric Lee versus Josiah Sturman.
Two great players.
These are local players too to the Bay Area. And I think Joshua Sturman is having a really good tournament. I think he's doing extremely well. I'm not sure he's in position to get a norm, but he might be. I asked Tom, but Tom is, of course, starting the tournament, so. Okay. Okay, so he'll get back to me about who's in position to get a norm, because this is the last round of the tournaments. And they needed 6.5 points out of 9 to get a GM norm. But I think it's only 5.5 to get an IM norm. And you know, Nick, because you've done this all, you need at least a 2,400 rating to get an IM title and a 2,500 rating to get a GM title. So let's take a look at the games. And I'm going to back up, Nick, and you take me through the beginning of this game, which is on board one. Oops. I have to do that from the other screen, Jen. Okay. All right. So it starts as an English with 1c4. E6 is an interesting reply. You know, E6 is what I replied to everything, but that's just me, Nick. And it helped me with my opening preparation. I didn't have to prepare. G3 is consistent with the idea of C4 is to attack and hope to control the D5 square. Now he's thinking of putting the bishop on the long diagonal, fianchettoing it to G2 so it can strike at D5 as well. So this is pretty normal setup, isn't it, Nick?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So knight F6, again, attacking D5 square. Bishop G2, attacking the D5 square. Black plays D5. So isn't he afraid that white afraid of losing that C4 pawn? Pawn takes pawn.
Yeah, it's very hard to keep it. If I mean, you could always go queen to A4 check and
pick it up right away. Yeah.
Right away.
So he ignores it. He plays that at 3. He says, ha ha ha, I got that queen A4 check in my back pocket. But he does take it, Nick, right away.
This is the ready system. Yes.
Get ready for the ready. Richard Reddy was a great master of chess, and he wrote a book. I think it was called something like that, wasn't it, Nick?
Oh, it was Masters of the Chessboard, I think.
Masters of the Chessboard. Okay, thank you. That's why we were paying you the big money to help us out here, Nick.
Oh yeah.
Remember these things. Castles. Okay. He didn't bother with the taking the pawn back with queen A4 check. So now he plays A6. So he's intending to play B5 and say, I'm going to hold on to that pawn. Wow. So Josiah Sturman is saying, you know, material matters. All right. So Eric Lee plays queen C2. And he says, okay, C5. And
So
that's all the moves. That's all the moves we have right now, Nick. What do you think of this position?
Yeah, well, okay. Josiah's going for take his share of the center with C5, and yeah, it's the normal sort of ready position. Nothing super for white, but he gets the sort of setup he wants. And now I think I might just grab that pawn on C4 if I were white.
So white's thinking now, and let's go to another game while white is deep in thought. And let's go to board 2 action. Kasia, a local favorite, is playing Leonid Uderson. Now, do you know Leonid? You must have met him over the board, maybe? Or he,
Not. No, I haven't.
okay. So neither have I, but Chris Torres knows him well, and he was telling me a little bit about him on one of the previous broadcasts. Chris Torres is a big supporter of this, and his daily chess musings are not to be missed. D4 and F6, which is what I played, so I know what I'm talking about so far, Nick. C4, E6, which is what I played, and F3. And so now what I would play was bishop to B4 check. But black has something else in mind here. He's going to play B6.
Okay. Standard Queen's Indian, so we know you're a Bogo Indian and you're E6 French defense. So
E6 was always in my repertoire. And it featured in a lot of my games. But yeah, the Bogo Indian was the way I would play it. But he's going into the Queen's Indian, which is really a little bit more solid, wouldn't you say, Nick?
Yes, the most solid defense.
Yeah. So G3, he's going to say, if you're putting that bishop on that long diagonal, I'm going to put mine on it too. That seems reasonable. Bishop to E7 is just a preparing castling, very normal moves. So now I'm out of my element. If they're playing normal moves, Nick.
We're going to have our Zoom meeting tomorrow.
And castles, D5.
Okay, yeah, I'll agree with that. Yeah, that would be good.
Pam will set it up.
Okay.
Yeah, no, she'll do that now. She'll set it up and we'll be on Zoom.
You back with us? Okay, Nick.
This is the old way of playing it for black.
Right.
You do get pinned on the long diagonal.
It seems that way to me. So, now white chooses to take because the bishop has placed itself on B7, so it's no longer blocked in by that E6 pawn, which gives so much trouble to players like me for so often because the bishop cannot go from C8 out along the diagonal to H3 because of the E pawn on E6. But in this case, he says, well, you're not going to put your bishop on that diagonal anyways because you put it on B7. So I'll just take back. And now he's traded a wing pawn for a center pawn. Nick, is that a big deal, a little deal, or no deal at all?
Yeah, it's not much of a deal, no.
Okay. Because I was always taught to keep your center pawns and trade them for the wing pawns. Or if I could trade a wing pawn for a center pawn, I would get an advantage. But that seems to have been advice that was once true, no longer really given quite so much. So knight c3 seems like the logical square for the knight. Why not put it there right away? Castling seems prudent in this position. Now knight e5, the first venture into enemy territory. All right. So is this all standard setup still, Nick?
All standard, yes. I remember Spassky used to play this way as black.
Okay. Well, it's good enough for Spassky. Okay. Knight a6. Did Spassky play like this?
Well, knight a6 is a good move, though.
Okay. Because it's preparing c5?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so white says, I'm going to play my bishop. I'm not going to play my bishop on the c1, h6 diagonal, which, normal good-for-nothing players would do. I might try to penetrate on the queen side. But it looks like a little out of character to me from this position. b3 was not suggested to me in my first glance at this position, Nick. What do you have to say about it?
Yeah, you're not exactly sure where to go. You don't want to go bishop g5 because h6
Right.
hits you. So b3, yeah, it's a flexible move. Maybe pawn to c5, the bishop could go to b2.
Right. Okay. And what black does here is break with c5 as we predicted, and the bishop does go to b2. Because at first glance it sees, well, the pawn on d4 is in its way, but that pawn might get exchanged. So then that long diagonal would open up, and the bishop on b2 would be preferable to the bishop on e7. So all of this complicated play, it's why Nick is here to explain it for us. And that's the moves currently having it, and would say we're still in the opening stage, Nick?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, still the opening, but about the end of the opening.
All right. So let's switch to board 3. Holy cow, quick draw.
Oh, they've had enough for this tournament.
I think so. I think they've all decided that these two have decided I've got no prospects for getting the norms I achieved, or I've already locked them up. I'll look at the score table later. But there's no sense in me trying to play out this game. And besides that, I'm tired. Now we have our tournament leader playing black in this game. Got 7. Let's see, he scored an amazing total. Might be 6.5 out of 8.
Wow.
So he is the leader of the tournament, and I think unquestionably going to be at least co-champion or one of the winners. And in this position, let me back up to the start of it. And he might be trying to get, if he draws, then he's a clear winner. So Balaji is a local player. I don't know if you know him, Nick, but he's playing up in most of these games, and he's trying to secure a higher rating. I think that's part of what is, or he's not playing up in most of these games. He's 24-43, and I forget what his norm prospects are, but obviously he's going after a GM norm, and that might be really tough at this point. He's only got one game to go, and I think he had to win out 8 and 9 to do that. So let me just check what he did in round 8 really quickly. Oh, he did. Let's see. He got beat. So yeah, it doesn't look like he's got his norm possibilities. We are looking at the tournament winner playing black, and right now white is playing for pride. He says, I don't want you to get that half point against me. I'm going to try to win. Okay. So this is a variation of the Sicilian that's quite popular in this tournament, Nick. And is that true, generally speaking now? Is this the variation to play?
Well, lots of lines are popular in the Sicilian. But okay, pawn on e6. We take your point. E6 is a good move.
Thank you. So I've enjoyed these Sicilians because the pawn's on e6. D4. C takes, D takes, knight takes D4, knight C6. Now one game we saw that the knight took on C6, bishop, the B pawn captured, and then white continued to E5. I thought that was a very interesting strategy, but this game goes a different way. Knight C3, queen C7. He doesn't really want that pawn to go to E5. And queen gets off the back rank. It's a developing move. It prevents the bishop from going to F4. But doesn't it run into maybe a knight B5 in there somewhere, Nick?
Well, then the queen would head back to the B8 square, and you'd just kick out the knight with pawn to A6, which is a very useful move for black. So,
got it. So it's like, please attack me, is what the queen is saying. And bishop to E2 is just going to continue his development, castle to safety, and then get the action started in the center. So it's a good developing move. He plays the A6 anyways. He says, okay, if you didn't give me a tempo, I'm going to play it. I'm going to use a tempo to do it. and white castles. And knight f6 looks like a perfectly natural developing move to me, Nick. And black replies with king h1. Now tell me a little bit about king h1. It looks like, gosh, you know, you were castled, you were safe. Why would you take time to move your king to h1?
Well, one reason is if you charge ahead with pawn to f4, then after knight takes d4, queen takes d4, bishop c5 would pin the queen to the king. So the king's just better tucked away in the corner.
Well, that makes perfect sense to me because, you know, if I played f4 and they took on the knight, that they took on d4, I would recapture with the queen and lose it. So this is an improvement on the way I would play. King h1, bishop e7. He says, okay, I'm just going to develop a castle. Consistent with his move, he wants to play f4. He prepared it though. Couldn't play it right away. And d6. Now this is really an interesting pawn formation for me because, you know, you think about the goal often is to create a weakness that you can attack, and the pawns on e6 and d6 are not aggressively placed at all, Nick, but they don't seem to give you a target to attack. Is that correct to say?
Well, they're very good defensively. They take they just stop white from coming forward. And this was played many times in these classic Karpov-Kasparov battles in the 1980s in the World Championship matches.
Is that the one that it featured Karpov going up very decisively, apparently, but then Kasparov got in draw mode and just drew again and again and again?
Well, or in fact, the return match, too.
Oh, yeah.
A year later, they played a lot of these.
Okay. All right. So this is why Nick is here to correct me on my errors. And bishop to e3 looks like a normal developing move. The bishop, of all the squares it could occupy, e3 seems to be the best. So why not put it there? And castles, black completes is going about completing its development. Now queen e1. It looks a little bit like king h1. Like, why would you just move over one square? Haven't you got something better to do?
Well, that's the shortest route to the king side because white wants to attack.
Right.
Just as a point, instead of queen to e1, Karpov would always have played pawn to a4 to slow black down on the queen side.
Good point, because a4 would discourage b5, and b5 would be black's signal that I'm coming at you on the queen side, and white is signaling to black I'm coming at you on the king side. So sometimes when the center is pretty standoffish, no one has a clear advantage. No one can advance in the center to establish an advantage. The play shifts to the wing. So black, for some reason, maybe Nick can tell us, takes on d4. Now's the time, he says. Bishop takes. And then plays b5. Is that because he didn't want to play b5 right away, Nick, for some reason?
You could have also played b5 right away, but this is a very popular variation. You traded off the knight, so when the bishop comes to b7, it has that nice long diagonal.
Correct. Very good point. a3 to prevent b4, I assume? A3 was played with the idea of preventing b4?
Oh, yes, because b4 would disrupt the knight, it would leave the e4 pawn hanging.
Right.
Yeah, you don't want to allow that.
So you want the action to be on the king side, but you can't let black just have his way on the queen side. So you have to take a little bit of time to slow him down. And white does it with a3. But now bishop to b7 connects the rooks, almost so close to completing your development. And the bishop is on a long diagonal, looks very powerful there because the power of a piece is related to this mobility. And its mobility is the scope of squares that it can go to. And the bishop on b7 is poised. If the e-pawn disappears or advances, that bishop would have a striking range all the way to white's king. So it seems to be well positioned on d7. Now this is what you were talking about. The shortest route to the king side was queen e1, g3.
And it has the nice point that if black plays knight takes e4, trying to win a pawn, you go checkmate in one move on g7.
So that's what we call discouraging knight takes e4.
Yes, discouraging.
Okay. All right. So black does not go for the fake pawn offer and plays rook ac8. So now all his pieces are developed. His development is complete. And white really only has the rook on a1 to complete white's development. But he does it right away because he says, okay, I know you weren't going to take it, but I'm going to play bishop to d3 to defend it anyways. And that's where we are on board 4. So you would say this is still pretty much in the opening. The opponents have probably seen this position before.
Yeah, this is still opening theory here. So then thousands of games with this variation.
Okay. And this game was also agreed to a draw after only 11 moves. So I would say, and Robert has had a very, very good tournament, including a win in the last round, which has secured him, because Robert was at 2385. And remember talking a little bit early, 2400 is what you need. So he's done wonders for his rating. He's clearly going to be over 2400 because I think he's ended up with 6 points out of 9. And that would be sufficient for an IM norm. But I think he's already got, he's an FM now, but I think he's already got his IM norms, but he needed to get the rating over 2400, which he has accomplished. And he says, hey, I've got nothing left to prove.
Very good. Congratulations, Robert.
Tip of the hat to you, Robert. That's awesome. All right, so let's go back to some of the live action. And this is where we left off. We left off after knight e5, and then black played rook a7. Now this seems like a crazy move to me, Nick. The rook is on a8. It's only got one square to go to, and he moves it there. Why? Why would you do something like that?
You gotta like those mysterious rook moves.
Mysterious rook moves are part of our chess culture.
Yeah. But of course, he wants to play pawn to b6, and he doesn't like losing his rook on a8.
Oh, see, I would have just gone about my business. I might have played b5 and said, ha, 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 now you can't take my c-pawn.
Oh, that's true.
When he took my rook, I would go, oh, I didn't see that. So rook a7 looks like a funny move, but there's a definite point behind it. Okay. And he says, all right, I see what you're doing. I see you want to hold on to that pawn, but I'm going to play a4, not allow you to play b5. So he says, well, I really wasn't going to play b5. I was going to play b6. And that's the position we're in now. Still in the opening stages. Is this kind of still ready? It looked like or ready to you?
Kind of ready, but white to me made natural looking moves. This rook to a7, it's a little bit strange development. So I kind of prefer the white side.
Okay. We have a clear preference. Nick prefers white. All right, but black has gotten e6 in, so I'm thinking I'd like black. Okay, so we have a disagreement between Nick and I, and let's go to board 2. Okay, now where did we leave off in this? I know he had played b3 here, which we had called into question. c5 was the logical, and bb2 is also logical. So now he redirects the knight to c7. Which is also a point of knight to a6. It looks like, why move the knight to the rim? It's grim. But no, the knight is redirecting towards the center of the board. So this is good. And white takes time to defend a pawn on d4. If he wants to maintain a pawn on d4, he's got to protect it with a pawn. So this makes sense if he wants to keep a pawn on d4. And the next move is pretty logical too, knight e6. He puts additional pressure on the d4 square. So There's no pawn on e6, but a knight on e6 is pretty good too in my book, Nick. What do you think?
Yeah, I like that knight on e6. All black's pieces are very useful. Still, white's got, the cross, the enshadowed bishops, one on the longest
Right.
white diagonal, the other on the longest black diagonal, and also a good setup for white.
Okay. And white plays rook c1, and that's all the games that we have, in, all the moves we have in this game. So, and I'm not sure what the status is of Kostya. I know that he's a local favorite. He had a big fan group rooting for him earlier, and I'm not sure what position he's in. Sorry that I don't have my homework done. I have
It sounds delicious.
him at 24.54. So he's got his GM title. So he's not in this for any other reason than to provide an opportunity for these young players to get a title, to get their ratings up. So good for him. And so he's playing on in this position against a younger player, Kostya, who's trying to make his mark in the chess world. And he is an IM now. His rating is 2390, so he may already be he's already an IM. So his goal may be to increase his FIDE rating, maybe possibly get a GM norm, but that seems out of the question for him now. But they're still playing, so that's good in our book. And the other live.
It's nice when people just play for the game, just because
Yes,
they don't need a reason.
I can't stress that enough, Nick. Because it should be fun. You should like to play chess. It shouldn't be this onerous task that you set before you. If it is that way, how could you be enjoying yourself? Even if you choose this as a lifestyle, you can't really think of it as just work, because then it becomes tedious and difficult for you to get up for it, get motivated. But if you still have joy when you play the game, you get into a certain position that just fascinates you. That's the joy of chess. And you like solving problems, and you get that aha moment when you do, and you think, oh gosh, this feels so cool. And how often do we get that in life? I get it, solving a crossword puzzle or something like that. But when you can get it by doing it in chess, it's a special feeling, because it's a game of logic, and it's a complicated game. And if you have a puzzle that your opponent sets for you and you solve it, it is a delightful feeling. So right now we have seen this position it developed from a Sicilian defense, a variation that has been played thousands of times, according to Grandmaster Nick DeFermian. And who am I to disagree with him? And so the last move is bishop to c6. What's the point of moving it to c6? It seems to be blocking the queen and rook on the action on the c file. But there wasn't really any penetration squares on the c file, so that doesn't look so bad. Is he going to be trying to play his queen to bishop 7 to pile up on e4 even more?
Yeah, probably queen to b7, and then he can also play pawn to a5 and get that threat of pawn to b4 in.
Oh, right. So the bishop on c6 protects the pawn on b5, although it's attacked twice. So maybe after queen b7, both the threat on e4 and the possibility of playing a5, b4 are. So this looks like a very solid move.
Yeah, but this is developing nicely. It's going to be a real action game, I think. White pressing on the king side, black on the queen side, and the center's fluid. So it's why people love to play the Sicilian, for all the great variety and action you get from it.
Yes, and that variety is a main thing. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that, because you can get too rigid in your opening preparation and your opening routines, and so you just kind of see the same game over and over. But variety is the spice of life, and so if you can play multiple opening systems well, then you can get more and more types of positions that you can play well. And so I think that mastery over one opening system is not the way you would become an IM or GM. Is that fair for me to say, Nick?
Yeah, well, I think that is good advice. Though some people, again, like Fisher, they would settle on one system and always play it.
And here's me telling Bobby Fischer he was wrong. Yeah, he didn't know how to prepare his chess game. No, Fischer was an extraordinarily innovative player as well. And he had his systems and you could try to prepare for him, but he would also come up with new novel moves. And I think that, so he was still, even in the common positions that you may have looked at 1,000 times, he might look at it with a fresh eye and see something that has been many other players have missed.
Yes, he certainly had this unique ability to, develop a position or find, key points of the position that it was remarkable.
Did you get started playing chess because of Bobby Fischer, or was it a coincidence that you got good
Well,
right after Fischer?
I started, there were a lot more tournaments after Fisher, and so that was really good for my development as a chess player. And everybody was playing, so that was a lot of fun.
Right. And where did you cut your teeth, as the saying goes?
Well, one tournament is the American Open back in the 70s even, or early 80s. They always had some great players there, and that was a tradition.
And who was the prime organizer of those American Opens?
Well, it was Southern California organizers. One was Jerry Hankin in the old days.
Yes.
There's
Jerry Hankin. Whatever people thought about Jerry Hankin, he made a great contribution to chess. He really organized a lot of tournaments, and he was very proud of even if you made master. That was a sign that you were a chess player in Jerry's book, and so he'd like to play in tournaments that were master only or something like that. But but that may have been the snobbish side, but he also played these wide open tournaments and provided players of all abilities, all ranges of abilities to play. So a little tip of the hat posthumously to Jerry Hankin for all that he has done for chess.
He certainly deserves that.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to go back and do a little scan about which games are still active. And that let's go back to board one. We'll start with that game. Some action has taken place. And so after 95, we saw that weird, crazy move, Rook A7, that had a point to it. There was actually a purpose behind it. A4 was played, B6 was played. And then finally, after all these moves, Nick, he restores material equality.
Good.
He recaptures that.
I'm just happy he took back that pawn.
Yes. And so now, the elements of chess we've been talking about, you have space, you time, you have material or force, you have king safety, pawn structure, all these things. Material is back in balance. So neither player has an advantage in material. What would you say about the development, though? White seems to me to have a lead in development. Is that true, Nick?
Yes, it's sort of. It's strange development. Black's done some odd things, but also White's bishop and knight on B1, C1 are not out yet, so that's a little slow. Maybe Black is fine here.
Okay. So as Nick is pointing out, the bishop on C1, the knight on B2, the rook on A1 are all on their original squares. So yeah, you've developed the king side. Yeah, you got the queen off the back rank, but you are far from having completed your development. Now you'd say, well, look at all the pieces on Black's back rank. Well, you can play bishop to E7 and castle and get caught up pretty quick. What happened to the floor? My goodness. So someone's playing around. Someone's playing tricks on me. I don't know who, but we'll see if black can catch up in development. And according to what Nick just told us, I would think that it should be pretty simple. Maybe not simple is the right word, but pretty much the advantage in development is not that great. What about the element of space, Nick? Who's got more space in this position?
Yes, so again, white's not achieved that yet. It's but we'll see if white could get in a D4 break or something, then it might work, but that doesn't seem to be easy to do. So it seems black is equalizing with his unusual strategy. It looks like he played bishop to B7 and traded the light squared bishops, which is,
Right.
you know, that's nice to get rid of white's being shadowed bishop.
Absolutely, because now look around the king's safety is another element of chess, and look at the white squares around the king. They seem to be a little unprotected, unguarded, and crying out. Black is hearing them cry out to be occupied by black pieces, but that's not so easy to achieve either. So this is a very interesting setup, not that conventional. Black has achieved the getting rid of the the G2 bishop for white, and I think that's an accomplishment. Black has his pawn on E6. That's an accomplishment. So I think I'm looking at black equalizing as well. So Nick and I
Yes.
are finally in agreement on something. B3. He's saying, I'm not gonna play to get my pieces out along the traditional sense of moving my D pawn and moving my bishop along that diagonal. I'm going to go and fight on the flank, and I'm going to play bishop to B2. So I haven't got the possession of the long diagonal from H1 to A8. So how about the one from A1 to H8? Maybe I'll get that diagonal.
So, Jim, I'm afraid I'm going to have to go now. The
Okay.
players are streaming in for the Tuesday night marathon here.
Tuesday night marathon, a tradition of the Mechanics Institution since 1971 or 2, something like that. And long time, wonderful tournament, and go for it, Nick. And thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. You know, I'm a big fan of yours, and I feel graced every time you join me on one of these broadcasts.
Well, thank you for having me. It was great to see this tournament with all these terrific young players. So
Yes.
wonderful. My congratulations to the organizers for this.
Thank you, Nick. Organizers everywhere love to hear that. The players acknowledge him. Okay, Nick, I'll take you off screen now. Thanks
Bye.
again. All right, that was Nick DeFermian, a grandmaster from way back when in my career, and you know, grew up with me and just got better than me. Doggone it! And as did so many other players of the Fischer generation. And I have stopped. I've gotten over most of my resentments, but I still have a few. But Nick's not one of them. He's a great guy as well as a great player. So I'm really happy that he got a chance to give his insight into these positions. Now it's just me again. But one thing I'm going to do because we were talking about the organizers of this chess tournament, and that's really wonderful. Oh, I got a comment. Wow, with Rook A7, the chess giant chimes in. Yes, Rook A7 was freaking me out. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to change the banner. It's rolling across the bottom of the screen right now is my foundation, efoundation.org. You can get to that foundation, get to my website that way, and see what I've been up to and what the eFoundation's purpose is. But one of the other organizers I want to point out is Mission 360, and this is the URL that you can track them down to and find out what they're doing. And Mission 360 is really behind this. According to Chris Torres, he told me that there are a couple of high school guys who are getting good, and they decided that they wanted to bring IM and GM norm tournaments back to the Bay Area. You know, they're just a couple of high school kids. What can they do? And they got it done. And I am suspicious, just because I'm this kind of guy, that it may be that their parents might have had been on some help in getting this done. You know, because one of the things about chess kids getting better is their parents are usually behind them, supporting them in so many ways, taking them to tournaments, making sure that somebody else can take them, that they trust. Um, and it's a financial cost often. It's travel, hotel expenses, entry fees, and on and on. And most chess players know this. You know, if you want to play a strong competition, you usually have to travel. Um, Unless you live next to the marshal. Most of the grandmasters aren't within walking distance of your home, so the parents have to give them these opportunities. So shout out to chess parents everywhere, and tip of the cap to them. So this is a fantastic organization inspired by two young players who wanted to to get some competition, and they said, well, if it won't uh, if I can't get to them, why don't I move them to me? And I butchered that analogy, but you know what I mean. So they moved the mountain to them. And they're playing in San Jose now at the home of Bay Area Chess. So we want to give the tip of the cap to Bay Area Chess as well, because they're providing the facilities in San Jose as we speak, where all these players can come together. And this is the ninth round. They spent a lot of time together and either form friendships or enemies. And hopefully there's been more friends than enemies in this tournament because chess is meant to be fun, fun for all. But when you get to this level that these guys are at, it becomes competition of the highest order. And competition, it's hard to be friends with your competition, because you're going to have to play them again down the road. You just know it. You're going to see them again. And so, when these friendships are formed and you can still play against each other, it's a marvelous experience. It's wonderful. So the last person I want to give a shout out to is Chris Torres. Chris Torres can be found on this URL or the Twitch TV Daily Chess Musings, or you can just go to Daily Chess Musings, just do a search on that, you can find him. And he does this every day. His love for chess is pronounced. He's a chess coach. He teaches so many students to learn the game, to get better at the game, to get as good as they want is the purpose of many of these nonprofit organizations. And Chris is not necessarily nonprofit. I think he's got a .com after his name, but that's okay because if you're teaching, teachers deserve to get paid. And I'm going to get off my soapbox now. But I'm going to go back to one more sponsor. I want to do a little shout out to CalChess, the state affiliate for Northern California, to the United States Chess Federation. US Chess is their brand name. And they are the national governing organization for chess and the member in FIDE, the international governing organization for chess. So if FIDE recognizes only those tournaments submitted by the United States Chess, US Chess. And if you want to get a title, US Chess is the one that submits it on your behalf. You can't approach FIDE as an individual and say, hey, look at my results, because you need to go through their recognized member organization, which is US Chess in the United States. And most countries have their own. And FIDE is a membership organization of member nations as opposed to individuals. And these nations come together once a year, twice a year for a general assembly. And it usually corresponds with the Olympiad, which is one of the best tournaments I've ever attended. Because it's a team competition. I've always loved team competitions, and there's some of the best players of the world are playing in those team competitions. And so then you have the pride of representing your own country at stake as well as your individual desire to show what you got and what you're capable of doing on the chessboard. So I am going to go back and take another look at these games in progress. We still have 3 that I see live. I'll start with board 1. Board 1 has just made that B3 move. And let's continue on with the moves that have been played. Subsequently, knight c6 looks logical to me. D4 is one of the squares that's going to be contested, and knight c6 plays with 9 towards d4. So a smart developing move, almost catching up in development. Oh, pretty close. So bishop to b2 gets that back rank and develops along the nice diagonal. A1 to h8. That's a long diagonal. And it does cover the d4 square, which they've been fighting over. Who's going to control it? And remember, occupying a square is not necessarily controlling it. So who's attacking it more often is a better sign of control. And right now, black has the c pawn attacking d4, the knight attacking d4, and the queen attacking d4. And white only has the bishop attacking d4. So right now, d4 appears to be in control, under the control of black. But what if I move pawn to e3? I'm not recommending it. What if I did? Then that control would be contested. So we still don't know who's going to get control over d4. So he meets bishop b2 with bishop e7, and then he's going to castle. And if he can move his queen, his development will be complete. So now white plays d3. Very interesting to me. Maybe he's thinking of bringing the knight into the game via d2. Knight d2, maybe f3. So maybe d3 is played, but also notice that it's attacking the e4 center square. So there is a purpose, method to the madness behind d3. But black just continues to develop. And yes, knight does come out to be via d2. All right, so white's rooks are now connected. Only the rook on a1 is not moved. Only the queen on d8 is not moved for black. So we're starting the end of the opening phase, entering the middle game, where different things make it's a different set of principles that the middle game is played under than the opening. Knight to d5. Okay, it looks like he's going to try to play one of them to d4, attacking the queen. I think that's why knight d5 is played. And rook fc1. Now that's interesting because this is always a question in many chess players' minds. Which rook to move? It happens over and over again. Which rook should I move? When the rooks are connected, you have the choice of moving either one to c1. And I think because you've already castled the king's rook, the inclination would be to move the a rook to c1. But what white is telling us here is the action is going to be on the queen side. And if a knight does drop into d1, I want to move my queen back to d1 maybe, and my rooks will still be connected. But if I move my other rook, the a rook, to c1, and I played back to queen d1, I disconnect my rooks. So actually, moving the f rook to c1 seems to be the better rook. Now, that's the current position of this game. So let's look to see whether there's more action. And board 2, okay. All right, so the c5 maneuver back here was one we thought was indicated. And Kostya plays bishop to b2, which we thought, and then we left off at knight c7. Well, and then e3, we saw that, and knight e6, we saw that, and we talked about why that is. So rook c1, well, that C file might open. If c takes d4, that file might come open. If not, pressure on c5 might come into the game. But in any case, it looks like the rook on the c file is a good place to put it. And why not do it now? So, and on the other hand, black says, yeah, I'm pretty sure this rook belongs on e8. So why not put it there now? I'll think about the rest, moving the other pieces some other time. This rook seems clear that it wants to be on e8. So now white decides to take on c5. This is the current position, and black is choosing. He's got 3 ways to take. He can take with the b pawn, he can take with the knight, he can take with the bishop. So black is currently thinking, Leonid is thinking now, which is the best. If he takes with the b pawn, he would create a pawn structure that we call hanging pawns. And you'll notice that black would then have 3 pawn islands. Pawn islands, one is the pawn on a7. The second would be the pawns on c5 and d5. And the third would be the pawns in front of the king, h7, g7, f7. So there's 3 pawn islands. And you would notice that black would only have 2. a2, a, and b3 are one island. And then e3, f2, g3, h2 is a second. So it's actually better pawn structure to have 2 pawn islands than it is to have 3. And now everything you say in chess, you have to have a little caveat, and if everything else is equal. Because if one of your pawns is a protected pass pawn in the middle of the board, that might be worth having it just a pawn island. So in most cases, 2 islands are better than 3. Usually, most of the time. Caveat, caveat, caveat. So board 2 is still moving from the opening stages into the middle game stages. And this is no longer, I don't think, a question of opening preparation, but middle game calculations. Do I want to take a piece? With a piece, if I take with a piece, my d5 pawn is isolated. Now I've got 3 attackers, 3 defenders, so I'm not going to lose it. An isolated pawn. And then that d4 square is crying out to be occupied by a knight as a blockade. Blockade the d pawn, which is isolated, so it cannot move forward. Put a piece there in front of it. The knight is ideal as a blockader. So do you want to play in the isolated pawn game, or do you want to play with the hanging pawns? That's probably what black is thinking right now. So I'm just going to bounce around from board to board, and we're going to go back to the action on board 1. Okay, so we've made some progress here. Where did we leave off? I think with knight b2, knight d5. And we did play our rook f, c1, and that was where we left it. Okay, and I was thinking that the action seems to be brewing on the queen side. But then black says, hey, wait a minute. f6, you know, my king is not in danger, so this slight weakening of my king position is no big deal. And why would he play there? Well, he's covering the e5 square. It's attacking the e5 square. The e5 square is contested now. And now it's not possible for white to put a piece there. So it's interesting. And is he preparing e6, e5, which would put a hammer hold back on d4? I don't know. He might be. And there's another maneuver. He hasn't moved his queen yet. Wait, maybe he wants the queen on the king side. So as we saw from white in another game, the maneuver queen e8, then queen g6 or queen h5 is possible now that the f pawn has gotten out of the way. So I'm not entirely sure. I won't pretend that I know. I'm not sure how this game is going to go. It could go one in 2 ways easily, with e5 being an option for black and queen e8 and then transfer to the king side quickly, which would be much more difficult for white to transfer his queen to the king side. But white does play knight e4. You might want to ask me why. Oh, f5 is played right away, without much thought. So you think, why would you play f6 then f5? Doesn't it cost you a tempo? Well, not if the knight on e5 has to move. In fact, you can say, hey, I got that second move for free. I actually wanted my pawn on e5, on f5, but I didn't want to allow f4. But he doesn't have time for f4, or putting a piece on e5. He doesn't have time to secure control over e5, because I'm attacking his knight. He's got to move it, right? Maybe. It doesn't look like there's any tactical answer that would give black pause from capturing the knight. So I'm thinking the knight has to move. It could go to c3, it could go back to d2, but it doesn't look like it can go anywhere else or remain in place without being lost. So we'll come back to this game and see what White's decision is. Right now, I would tell you that White is taking a lot more time than Black. So Eric Lee is moving more slowly than Josiah Sturman, but that doesn't necessarily mean White is worse. It just means that White is thinking longer. And we told you the time controls are game 90 with 30-second increments. So every time you make a move, you get an additional 30 seconds. So the time left can be a little deceiving because if you bang off 5 moves in a row, you can get yourself some little more time. So let's look at the tournament leader, Shangzhou Su. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Mispronunciation is one of my superpowers. So, okay, where did we leave this game off? He had recaptured bishop e6 and b5. I remember that. He played a3 to prevent b4. I remember that. He played bishop to b7, queen g3. So now we're talking about the king side is where the action White wants the action to be. Queen side is where Black wants the action to be. So the rook develops a c file consistent with that strategy. And oh yes, I remember bishop d3, protecting the e-pawn, because the e-pawn was a phony sacrifice. But right now, it not only protects the e-pawn, but it protects the c-pawn. So if the knight wants to move, or is forced to move, it can, without losing the c-pawn, which you can see the queen on c7 and the rook on c8. Either one of them want to take something, and they would be happy to take the c2 pawn, but now it's protected. Okay, and we talked about bishop c6. Nick explained this to us, because he's now protecting the b pawn. So he can play a5. Not right away, because the b pawn still can be captured. Maybe not, because then what would happen to the pawn on c2? I'm not sure. So bishop c6, rook ae1, putting another defender on the e pawn, supporting its advance to e5 if that's in the air. So it looks like a good developing move, and White's development is now complete. So we're moving on from the opening stages of the game to the middle game stage. Now, I was expecting queen b7, but queen b8 was actually played in this game. And Nick is no longer with us, so I can't ask why. Why queen b8 instead of queen b7? Queen b7 was my move of choice. So, but we're having a grandmaster who's had a great tournament decide to put it on b8. So I'm going to go with him. I'm going to say I want what he has. And queen b8 must be better than queen b7. Okay. Let's see how the game develops and see if I can justify this. Oh, knight d5, a typical shot in the Sicilian. White is always looking for a chance to play knight d5, a sacrifice. And maybe it's a sacrifice, or maybe it's a temporary sacrifice. Temporary sacrifices are when you appear to be losing a piece, but you can regain it at the result of the tactics. At the end of the tactics, you will have recaptured a piece and hopefully improved your position. So Black says, well, the best way to accept the sacrifice is to take it, after all. And now, this is the point. The bishop on c6 is attacked, and the bishop on e7 is attacked. So I'm not really sacrificing a piece, but I might be. I'm not sacrificing a pawn either, am I? What is up here, sports fans? How can that be true? You will be left with 6 and 6. So how does he, after he plays e2, Black has to think, which bishop do I want to save? And he chooses to save the e7 bishop. He's thinking to himself that this dark squared bishop might be more useful than the light squared one. And who's to say he's wrong? But he is giving up the two bishops for a knight and bishop. And can Black give up that so easily? Is it okay? White now has the two bishops. They're both bearing down on the king. The queen's already over there. The rooks are developed. One on the open E file, another on an F file where an F4 pawn is advanced. Oh my goodness gracious, I would be scared. But I don't think black is scared. I know I would be, but I don't think he is. So now we see black also has 3 pawn islands, one of them an isolated pawn on D6. Typically an endgame weakness. We're still in the middle game though. Before the middle game, the gods have placed the end game. Did I say that backwards? I did. Before the end game, the gods have placed the middle game. In other words, there are more moves to be played before we can decide whether or not this pawn on D6 is just a weakness to be exploited, because there's a lot of action to be played. Now, that bishop on D8 can't not protect that knight on F6, because you notice the G7 pawn is pinned to the king by the queen. So the bishop seems stuck. You can't really, well, you could move the knight as long as it protects the G7 square. So it's not really pinned, but it can't go to E4 or D5, say, because you still have to protect against the mate on G7. So it's looking like white's pieces are more mobile. They have more power because their piece's power is dependent upon their mobility. And they seem to be more mobile, so I would say they're more powerful. I would go so far as to say they're better. So I like white. Now queen H3, with the immediate threat of bishop takes F6, followed by capturing on H7. So that's not something you can ignore. Black has to do this. G6. Okay. Now he could have played H6, but G6 is what he's preferred. He says, I want to put all these questions about white squares to rest. I'm going to put my pawns on right squares. You're not going to penetrate on the white squares. But that leaves the dark squares vulnerable. There's a bishop on D4 pointing right at him. There's a queen on H3 that can come into H6. Holy smokes, there's a lot of weaknesses around black's king. I'm scared. I'm pretty sure black isn't, but I am. I'm scared for him. So white's in a think now. Both of them have roughly the same amount of time left. Time is not an issue. Okay. Very, very interesting. So we've only got 3 games going, and I'm going to swing back and forth between them. Okay. We noted we left off previously with the knight retreating back to E2 from from E4 back to D2 and after F5, and now black places his bishop on the long diagonal opposing white's bishop on B2. So we're going to maybe see an exchange. White's thinking about this now, and if we get the bishops off, then both bishops would have been traded, and we're looking at a potential knight ending. And then you have to start thinking, well, what's the point of a knight ending? Well, knight endings are very similar to king and pawn endings. Like if you have a passed pawn, it can be very strong in a knight ending. Bishops have the ability to control both sides of the board. So a passed pawn and a bishop ending is still an advantage, but it's more pronounced than a knight ending. But who's got a passed pawn? Who can make one? It's not clear that that's an easy achievement. So white's thinking here, and the next move that he plays will tell us a little bit more about which endgame he thinks he wants to go for. Now, I want to point out in terms of pawn structure that the E6 pawn, once the pride and joy of black's position, is now temporarily backwards. In other words, there's no pawn that can protect it. But it can go to E5 fairly easily. Maybe that's a contest. Can black play E5? And then the pawns will be abreast. It'll be a pawn duel in the language of chess. So the E5, F5 pawns will not protect each other, but they will support each other if either advances. So this is the strength of pawn duels. One, you could only move one at a time, but if one protects, they automatically have a defender supporting them. So white plays knight f3. Now white could have gone there instead of knight to e4. He could have gone knight f3 then. And so black would have had the pawn on f6. And would black have played the pawn to f5 and followed by bishop to f6? Sure, he could have, but it wouldn't have been with tempo. It wouldn't have attacked the knight. So this maneuver, knight d2, e4, d2, f3, took 4 moves. It could have taken 2. So I'm not criticizing it. I'm just pointing out that the element of time is very important. However, in this position, it's more of a maneuvering game than it is a tactical hand-to-hand combat type of game. So taking your time and rearranging your pieces, maneuvering your pieces to their optimal squares is the idea, rather than doing it as fast as you possibly can. So very, very interesting. But it did take 4 moves instead of 2. Could white have used those moves more optimally? Maybe, maybe not. So let's take a look at board 2. Now this position has advanced. Let's see, where did we leave off last? We had the knight on e6. The pawns are still on the board. Rook c1 was played. Rook e8, we talked about that. Then he took there, and that's where we left it. We weren't sure how he's going to recapture. Recapture with the b pawn. Now these are the hanging pawns I talked about earlier. But the hanging pawns have the power. They're duels. It's a pawn duo. So either pawn can advance, and the other pawn will be supporting it. So that's their strength. But their weakness is that neither pawn can, as they stand, defend each other. So they're not quite as weak as isolated pawns, but they can be weak. They can become targets. And by targets, I mean that something to aim at. And so white might aim at that c5 pawn and say, are you going to play to c4? And then your d pawn will be back isolated on a half open file with my bishop on g2 pounding down on it. So c4 looks like, oh gosh, what if I ignore that and just attack the d5 square where the pawn is? Because the pawn can't advance now to d4 without being captured, or maybe it can. We'll have to calculate all these things. So what did white do? White played queen to e2. Now it looks like a good move to me. You connected your rooks. You could develop your queen. You developed it in a way that it pays attention to the center. For example, it's supporting an e4 maneuver if he wants to, if white chooses to. He's also threatening possibly to come to b5. That doesn't look like he will do that, but it's something that you have to think about. Now, what he is also preparing is probably rook f to d1, putting both his rooks on the files that the hanging pawns are on, increasing the pressure on each of them. So queen e2 looks like a good move. And so what could black possibly do? Well, what about queen to d6? He's saying if you do nothing, I'll take that knight on e5. So now white's thinking about this. White's thinking, I like that knight on e5. I mean, I really like that knight on e5. I can't let him take it. So I have to protect it or move it. I can't trade it for anything. I don't have that many squares I can move to. But he does move to one of them, knight to d3, attacking that c pawn. He's hoping that it advances. Now, is this the opportunity for black to play instead of c4? Could he play d4? I just don't know. There's another thing that occurs to me is now that the knight is in the way of the queen, black could possibly play bishop to a6, pinning the knight to the queen and to the rook if the queen moves. So that looks a little nasty to me. It's the kind of thing that I would think looks a little nasty. But maybe this has all been calculated by white. So bishop a6, I play knight a4. What are you going to do? I'm hitting your c-pawn pretty darn hard. But it's a double-edged position. And I have no idea. Black might be thinking about a bunch better. Something simple like rook ac8 might be played. Something more complicated like knight e4 might be played. I am not sure. This maneuver, knight a6, c7, e6, has put the knight in a very good place. It's around the center, controlling central squares and squares around the center. So it's very nice. But he had also put his rook on e8. Now I'm thinking, hey, you know, it's got a bishop on e7 or knight on e6. What future does that rook have on the e5? Maybe it does. I don't know. We'll come back to this game and we'll see. And still, let's go check back on our tournament leader. Queen h6. It was in the air after g6 because what we said before, the g6 weakened the dark squares around the king. So then it's like if the position is crying out to white, please penetrate on the dark squares. Please penetrate on the dark squares. Now notice that you can't just kick the knight out, the queen out with knight g4. Attacking the queen, you say the queen must move, right? Yes, it must move to g7 checkmate. So the knight is still pinned, unless it moves to cover the g7 square. One possibility would be knight to e8. It could move and cover the g7 square. But then what about rook takes knight? Ouch! The cover of the g7 square vanishes. You can't waste time recapturing the rook recapturing the rook that has taken the knight because queen g7 would follow. So knight e8 doesn't work. Well, what about knight h5? That covers the g7 square. Well, then look at g4. Knight would have to go back to f6. Is that good or is that bad? Good or bad? Good or bad? So, we still have a lot of questions to be answered in this. It looks like white, to me, has done a great job of getting the two bishops in an open position, which would favor white over the bishop and knight that black is left with. White has forced the concession of g6, which has created dark square weaknesses, which is tying up black's pieces in defense. And pieces do not want to defend, they want to attack. That's their nature. But here, black's pieces have little choice. What are we going to attack? Now, possibly you're going to play a move like b4. I haven't calculated this at all, but it's a way to try to get some action on the queen side to maybe distract white from what looks like an overpowering attack on the king side. That's the only thing I can think of. It's overpowering, isn't it? How is black going to defend? I have no idea. I can't tell you how he's going to defend. It looks like white's position is clearly better. But black is thinking. So we'll go back. Okay, so we made some progress here. After knight f3, he didn't play e5. Couldn't play e5. But he can play g5. He's saying, hey, look, guys, let's talk this over. You're going to let me play g4. Because I will. And look at that now. That rook, which made that funny maneuver to a7, is now and ended up recapturing on b7. Now it can move in one move all the way to g7. It's been activated by advancing the g pawn. It can get into a kingside attack. Okay, so white says, well, yeah, I'm not so comfortable on the king side, so I'm going to initiate some action on the queen side, a5. Obviously, you don't want to capture that pawn because that would leave you with an isolated c pawn and an isolated a pawn. Now, it's true that white would have an isolated b pawn, but you would have two isolated pawns. You'd have to defend two, and white would trade 2 for 1 almost any day of the week. So, is b5 going to be played? And the only thing I would say about that right now, without having thinking about it too much, is that that c5 pawn would then become potential weakness, an object of attack, and would have to be defended. It's an interesting position, but this is he says, you know what? I'm going to ignore you and go about my business. With my business is expanding on the king side, g4. What are you going to do about that? That's a little bit more pressing than what you were doing on the queen side. You go ahead and do whatever you want on the queen side. I'm coming in on the king side, and you're going to be sorry. Ooh. So white is still deep in thought. White now has about 35 minutes left to play. This doesn't look to me yet to be a critical position, but it's just on the edge of critical. White's got to make good choices now. The choices you make have got to be good. I would say knight e5. And then the knight on c6 has to be protected or traded. And then does the action swing to the queen side again, where white is putting the pressure on? How does black get more pressure on the king side? It's not obvious to me how it's done. But this is the battle of wills that's going on. Black says, I want to play on the king side. White says, I want to play on the queen side. And who's going to get their way? This is what many chess games are about. Who's going to inflict their will on the other? Okay, I'm going to go back to this game. We had just left off with queen e2, queen d6, knight d3. Oops, knight d3. Queen a6. I was thinking of bishop a6, but queen a6 does roughly the same thing and keeps the bishop defending the pawn on d5. So it might once again be better than what I was thinking about. Okay. Well, folks, I am going to stop sharing the screen now, and it's 5:30 Pacific time. And what I'm going to do is take a break. All right. So I will be back in 5 to 10 minutes, and we'll continue to look at these games. All right. Let's see what I can put up in here. How about a be right back? Okay, that's kind of like be right back. Yellow and blue for supporting Ukraine. Okay, so let me share screen again and see what has happened. Oops, that's not what I wanted. I got you, Chris Torres, Daily Chess Music. Oh, was that a mistake on my part? Maybe. I'll share screen again. Try to, how about Marshall Chess Club? No, that's not what I wanted. Hey, stop it. Stop it. Wait a minute. The Marshall Chess Club, of course, is in New York City. It's a great, great chess club. So I'm going to stop sharing. Come on, I've got to be able to get this right once, right? Third time's the charm. How about, okay, that looks better. Now, Rook FD1 was played in this game in response to Queen A6. So, the Queen A6 was putting pressure along the diagonal. If the knight on D3 moved, then the queens would be exchanged. And Black is saying, I don't mind. I don't mind if it happens. I think that's what he's saying. But in any case, the rook that was on F1 clearly wanted to be on D1. So why not move it there? Now Black is thinking, Black is thinking. Black looks pretty good in terms of his piece development. The only piece that hasn't moved is the rook on A8. Does it belong on C8 or D8? My gut tells me there belongs on C8. And I might have to play the rook that's on E8 to D8. And then otherwise, I'm pretty happy with my pieces. But what's White got to complain about? White has 2 pawn islands to Black's 3. So I like this pawn structure. His knights are a little unusually developed, but his bishops are very well developed. Both kings are safe. Black is saying I have a little edge in space at the cost of a little weakness in pawn structure. I think that's what the discussion on the board is about. A little bit of space with your little bit of pawn structure weakness. Who's got the better game? I can't tell you one is clearly superior to the other because the position is dynamic. It could change in just a couple of moves. So we'll come back here and we'll look at it. We'll see what happens. But right now, let's go take a look back, see if any action has changed here. Ooh, wow, rook lift. Rook lift has been called. We had seen this position, queen had gone to h6. d5 was played. Seems reasonable. It allows the rook to recapture on f6, so the bishop could be free. So that seems like it's a pretty good move, sure. But does it really ease his burden of defense? Just a little bit, I think it does. But now look at this. Why are you saying, well, I've got all the time in the world. I might as well bring my rook to h3, threatening bishop takes knight and queen takes h7. I know it's kind of telegraphing what my plan is, but how are you going to stop it? Holy smokes. It's like, I don't know. How does he stop it? It looks pretty scary. Queen to c8. How does that stop it? I don't think it does it? Why not just play rook h3 now? Am I missing something obvious? Hmm. Well, I might be just one of those guys that's missing something blatantly obvious, but I would play Rook H3 here. But white plays something else entirely. F5. Now, if I didn't have Rook H3, I would play F5. That would have been my second choice. Black plays Queen to D7. Now, this is a repositioning of the queen. So Queen C8, Queen D7 makes sense in terms of helping with the defense because, like, for example, if F takes G6, F takes G6, then the queen is protecting the H7 square. I still don't know why I didn't play Rook H3. So I'm going to hold on to my resentment. And Rook G3, not Rook. Okay, I'm just going to have to let that go. Rook H3 was again indicated to me, but Rook G3. And he's saying, okay, I'm going to now threatening F takes G6, F takes G6, Bishop takes G6. And you're going to be crying your eyes out when I'm done with you. It does look strong. Black is in deep think now. This is our tournament leader having an impressive tournament. Balaji's just going after him. Look at those bishops. They're bearing down on the king side. D3 and D4. They're just saying, you know, I just want to get closer to you, Mr. Black King. Just want to get a little closer to you. But I'm okay attacking from way back here, too. The queen is saying, I'm so close to you, I can almost touch you. The rook is saying, hey, I'm on G3. You know, there's only a pawn between us. So all of them have their eyes firmly targeted on Black's king. And they're saying, I will settle for nothing less than overwhelming material superiority or checkmate. Those are my two objectives. I'm not talking about being a pawn up at an ending. I'm talking about ending the game in the middle of it. Wow. I will be surprised if Black comes up with a defensive idea here that works. But I have been surprised before. So let's take a look back, see if he's still got action on 3 games. 2 of them ended in early draws. They had said, I've had good tournaments, or I've met my objectives, and I am tired at the end of a long 9-round tournament playing against really strong players round after round after round. I'm done. And they packed up their stuff and they're ready to go. But they might be watching. Who knows? Because these games are interesting. So now we go back to board 1. Eric Lee, an FM, struggling against Josiah Sternman, an FM. But an FM that looks like he's stronger than the average FM, the everyday average FM. So, oh, did I just insult him? He's an IM. What? Was I misinformed? Or did I make a wrong assumption? Is that like me to make a wrong assumption? Doesn't sound like me. Huh. But it's possible. But his rating is at 2392, so he wants to get it over 2400. Because that's what we think of as the bare minimum for an IM. So where did we leave this? he left this at to g4. He must play the knight d5, I think. And he does. Now, that knight on c6 has to move or exchange or be defended. What's he going to do? Attacks the queen. Knight to b4. Hello, queen. Ooh. What's going on here? I cannot tell you exactly what's going on here. It's an interesting position, I can tell you that much. And thematically, white is poised to strike on the queen side. Thematically, black has gained space on the king side. Does he have enough material over there to generate a mating attack? There isn't enough now, but he can bring some over pretty quickly. Is that what his plan is? His long range plan? Oh, the queen had to get out of the way. D2 seems as good as any. Now, black says, hey, that a pawn was starting to annoy me. I'll just pass on by. Where are you going to put your knight? I'm attacking it, by the way. When the knight moves, just want to point out, when the knight does move, and I think it has to, that pawn on c5 is unprotected. So that's something that black has to think about, do something about. But that might not be something that he's more overly worried about. But this is part of the game, black trying to gain space. And he seems to have been doing it, except that knight on e5 is looking really good. It's occupying a central square and it's controlling squares all around the center. And the knight centralized like that is at its best, strongest. So it's thinking pretty highly of itself right now. So after b5, white is thinking, and white is now down to 20 minutes. So white can't think too long. I would think 93, that was crying out to be played. I wouldn't have thought too long about that. I don't see why not. Now is black saying this is the time for f4? I just don't know. The rook is attacking the c5 pawn. Does black take time to defend it? I don't know. So we'll see. We'll have to see. We'll have to come back. So black is going to be in a think for a little bit. This is like not a critical position, but very close to a critical position. A mistake here would be deadly. A second best move might be losing. A third rate move might just mean the house of cards comes crumbling down. You got nothing left to give. So let's leave them in that almost critical position. We have had some action here. Now, where did we leave off? Where did we leave off? C7, E3, 96, rook C1. We saw all this, we saw all that, we took. Now we got the hanging pawns. We played queen E2, queen D6, which was a good move to attack the knight. Knight had to retreat. And queen E6 I was personally thinking bishop to A6, but he played queen E6. And the rook to there was just about right. Now here's the thrust, D4. D4 looks like it was what black was thinking about the entire time. If the E file opens, the rook is well positioned on the E file already. And if he takes with the pawn, does black just say, okay, knight takes D4, I'm coming in? Or does he recapture pawn takes D4 and saying, I'm set up well, I have an isolated pawn, it's true, but it's defended, and I've got a lot of space. Whoa. So d4, that's suggesting that action is going to happen sooner rather than later. And knight a4 attacks the c pawn twice. It's defended twice. But you got to make a decision about that d pawn, don't you? Well, black makes it for him. Since I've captured on e3. Yeah. Just a slightly bit surprised by that decision. I'm sorry that I apologize because that pawn on c5 was attacked 3 times and only defended twice. So something had to give. And so what white is saying, or black is saying, is I will capture your e pawn. You probably don't want to recapture f takes e3 because then you've got 3 pawn islands and your king side is a little bit more exposed, a little bit weaker. So queen takes e3 is what I would prefer to do. And that would add another attacker on c5. So I'm thinking, what's the dealie here? Just don't get it. It looks like black's going to lose a pawn. But that's just what I think it looks like. We'll see. We'll come back to this position and see how it plays out. Yeah, queen takes e3. Yeah. I wouldn't have spent too much time thinking about that. I would have checked to make sure the tactics aren't there. There's no tactical surprise like ng4, and all of a sudden I'm going, oh, where I could put my queen. But I don't think that that's something that white is too concerned about. Queen has plenty of squares to move to. Okay. Well, knight d5 is possible. Hitting queen that way. And bishop takes bishop, bishop takes bishop. Bishop takes knight, bishop takes bishop. Then that pawn on c5 falls, it seems to me. But you'd have white square weaknesses around the king. Maybe knight d5 is playable. I have to think about that. And while you're thinking, your clock is running. That's one of the things about tournament chess that can be a little tough to get used to. While you're thinking, your clock is ticking. The ticking of the clock can get on your nerves. It doesn't get on everybody's nerves, but it gets on some players' nerves more than others. And it did get on my nerves, except I played rather quickly. Okay, so bishop takes g2. That seems to, the question there is like, I just really, and recapture is pretty clearly forced. I really want to weaken the white squares around your king. I'm not sure what I'm going to do about it. I want to weaken them. So now he plays the rook to c8. No more pieces left undeveloped. That was the final one. But I see 3 pieces defending it and 4 pieces attacking the c5. Is black just going to say, okay. Oh, here's a thought. Like knight takes, either knight takes, knight takes, either knight takes, bishop takes, exposes the rook on e8, threatening the queen on e3. So that pawn really is only pretending to be hanging. But it is isolated. It is under attack. It is weak. So this is why that rook f8 to e8, as I said at the time, was clearly the best position for it. It was obviously the best. So rook a c8 seems like a very good plan. They're roughly similar in time, but they're going to have, it's 20 moves in, and they've used about half the time. for each of them. All right, so we're on board 2. Let's take a look back at board 1, just because I'm feeling like going backwards in time. So he defends the pawn that was under attack. Okay. Played b5, 93 was indicated, rook c7. Makes sense. I really want that rook to come into the action along the 7th rank, or the 7th rank to get into the king side attack. But right now, okay, I'm gonna play a little guard duty. I'm not happy about it, but I gotta do it. Okay, so now White's clock is down to under 18 minutes. Nothing like time pressure yet, but you can't go into a deep think at this stage in the game. And a deep think may be what's needed at this point. Unless Black has worked out an optimal solution to the situation in advance, which may have been explaining some of his previous thinking. Now that once proud pawn on e6 still shouts out at me as a weakness. And knight g2, knight f4 is going to say, I'm attacking that weakness. Looks like a good maneuver to me. So, well played, White. But Black's spatial advantage is clear except for the knight on e5, which is a dominating. It's established an outpost if it can maintain it. It's a pretty darn strong piece. But that's really, and the bishop on b2 is also well developed. And the knight is redirecting itself after a roundabout to f4, which is going to put pressure on the weakness, the glaring weakness in Black's position, which is the pawn on e6, which is blockaded by the knight, the ideal blockader. So there's more chess to be played on board 1. And let's look at board 4. Okay, deep think. After rook g3, Black's got 30 minutes left on his clock. He's not in any way, shape, or form in time trouble. But this is a deep think. I can't see a clear defense. I don't know what Black is going to do. The one thing I could say is that in the short run, rook to e8 looks like it. White must respond to that because there's a back rank issue. The king has moved to h1, which we explained before. He wanted to advance his f1. You didn't want to allow pins along the g1 to a7 diagonal, and made perfect sense to put it there and advance the f pawn. But there are now some back rank weaknesses, and rook e8 is certainly a plausible move. Black can play that with impunity. He's not getting mated in 1, and he's threatening mate in 1. So I would say that's the only move I can see that saves Black. Because if rook takes rook, queen takes rook on e8, threatens, well, I take that back, doesn't really threaten. It's not really mate because the bishop on d4 can always go to g1. So it's not really mate. But it would take the bishop off of the a1 to h8 diagonal and rule out bishop takes knight, which in so many of the variations I was thinking about would collapse Black's position. So you really don't want to allow that, I don't think. So I would say if I was Black, I would probably bang out rook e8 because I just don't want to be thinking any more than I have to. And if he responds with something that gives the king some escape route, then maybe I can play queen f8. Ooh, drive that queen away before its dirty work is done. Maybe I can escape. Maybe I can escape. But if I play rook e8, what if the rook just moves to the f1? What do I do then? I just don't know. Black is trying desperately to defend. White's attack looks like a barbaric Viking attack or a German Goth attack on ancient Rome. It looks like it's overwhelming. But is there a defense? Sometimes all you need is one defensive variation that works. And even though your position looks like it's about to crumble, it holds. And this is what Black is trying to find. That one variation that holds. And so that even though White's position looks so promising, it doesn't result in overwhelming material advantage, doesn't result in checkmate, and the game goes on. Now he still has these long-term advantages of the two bishops versus bishop and knight, and that pawn on d5 is isolated, blockaded. It could be subject to a weakness in any ending, rook ending, bishop ending, whatever kind of ending we're playing, could be weak. Yeah, rook e8 looked forced to me. Now I would play rook f1. Of course, this is blitz mode in my brain, and I don't know if that is the right move. But I would play rook f1 without much thought. That's kind of what got me in trouble a lot in my chess playing career. I would play moves without much thought. Not so highly recommended. But they looked good to me and I played them. It was something that haunted me my entire playing career. Sometimes a move can look good and not be good. Ooh, I hate that, but it's true. Rook f1. Just like my brain told me. So now, I'd think it's infinitely preferable to play to f1 than taking, because taking on e8 gives queen e8 an opportunity to play queen f8, and then it may be sound and fury signifying nothing for white on that. And after that, so it seems clear you don't want to exchange those rooks. And rook f1 seems like the best position for that rook to take. The f file very quickly may become open, clearly where it belongs. Now the side defense of the rook on c6, protecting f6, possibly g6 if the knight moves. You know, it's been tried many times, and with mixed results. The sideways defense. Sometimes that's all you can do, so you do what you can when you can with what you have. Now, can he play something like queen e7, queen f6? Does he have time to do that? I'm still not sure why that rook isn't on h3 instead of g3. But I said I was going to give up that resentment. All right, so we'll come back to this game because Black has got 26 minutes left and plenty of time to think, but not time to do a deep think. So what's going on board one? All right. All right. So we left off at knight g2, threatening f4. And Black played, which is a very good move, queen to d6, which because it attacks that knight on e5. We were just talking about what a great outpost that is. It's a great outpost for the knight. Its knight is so powerful there. And incidentally, it also adds another defender to the c pawn, allowing the rook to shift to the king side if needed. And it might be needed. So how are you going to hold that position, that knight on e5? It seems so good. Is it too good to be true? Well, f4 would hold it. But hey, wait a minute. There's this thing we call en passant. You can't just pass a pawn like that without allowing it the opportunity to capture. It's one of the rules of chess. It's not the first rule you learn. Some people don't learn it ever, but it is a rule. So g takes f3 is perfectly reasonable and it seems logical. You don't want to allow that knight on e5 to stay and oh my gosh, so it could be good. So, but the knight has to retreat now, otherwise be captured. So knight takes f3. And now, that g pawn exchange for the f pawn, what's happened? Okay, the diagonal g1 to a7 has been opened. So that's something that I'm always going to keep my eye on. Is there a check that I have to consider? And during my calculations, don't overlook the possibility that there's a check along the diagonal. But otherwise, the knights are excellent at defense as well as in the attack. So the king looks pretty safe to me. And now the black king looks like it's not safe, but really it is because the white pieces have trouble shifting over to the king side. So the black king, even though there's a lot of air around it, and it doesn't seem to have too many pieces defending it, it's pretty safe. And now that e6 pawn that was starting to look like a pawn weakness, maybe it's a permanent weakness, now, you know what? It's not blockade. So black says, I am going to take advantage of that and move it. Now we have those 3 pawn islands on both sides now. And we have these hanging pawn structure again. And what did we say about the hanging pawn structure? They can not protect each other. But if one advances, the other supports it. So it's a very dynamic pawn structure. And it can result in tactics that favor one side or the other. And it turns out that when you push a pawn when another pawn is supporting it, it can be very effective. So e5 changes the dynamic of the entire game as far as I'm concerned, because black is saying, I now have a massive spatial advantage. The only piece in enemy territory is the knight on b4. And look at these pawns on b5, c5, e5, f5. They're controlling or attempting to control squares along the 4th rank, which is in white's territory. And white's the only answer really is the a5 pawn, which is much ado about nothing. So I would say it still looks to me like black has the better position. White has not lost by any stretch though. There's a lot of chess still to be played. And what is white going to do? Oh, white says, well, that F file is now at least half open. So maybe my rook belongs not attacking the c pawn anymore, but back on the f file. When there's a pawn on f2, it had no real prospects there, but hey, the f2 pawn's gone. Let's put it back there. Makes sense to me. So bishop to g7. Huh. Well, that certainly tightens up the defense around the king. Takes away queen h6, for example. I'm not sure white was planning on that, but queen h6 is now taken away. The queen could shift to g6 now if it wants. The rook could come to the c7 rook can come to f7. So it's a good move. I don't have anything bad to say about that one. So white is once again thinking. White is down to 11 minutes. And black has over an hour. Okay, king h1. White's going to have to start making moves. Does not have the luxury of deep thought. So king h1, remember that when the f pawn went missing, it exposed the g1 a7 diagonal. So the king gets off of it. He says, there's going to be some trick. I can see it down the road. Some trick involving a check along that diagonal. I'm not going to bother calculating the exact variations. I don't have time. So I'll just take it out of the question. I don't have to think about it anymore. Can't argue with that. King H1 looks like a good defensive move. Now black can take his sweet time. He's got an hour, 8 minutes to think. He can think as pretty much as long as he wants, but he doesn't take time. He plays knight c6. He says, oh, look at that d4 square. Ooh. I played d4 and I'm attacking that pawn on b3. That little weakling of a pawn can't be protected by any other pawn, has to be protected by pieces. I'm going to attack it. And if you capture, oh, good golly, I'm going to get a pawn on d4, strengthening my spatial advantage. Ooh, I have a protected pawn in enemy territory, taking up a lot of space. And my pawns are going to be, my pieces are going to be able to maneuver from the king side to the queen side and back again, while yours are going to trip over each other, trying to defend against my attacks. Ow, I still like black. That really looks hard for white to counter that. But you know, a spatial advantage can be decisive, but it isn't always. So there's plenty of reason for black to say, fight on, live to fight another day. So let's take a look at the other games live still. Oh, yep. Live is, okay, this position has changed. Now we remember that the king had recaptured the bishop and the rook had gone to c8. And because there was a little tactical that defended that pawn. The pawn didn't look like it was adequately defended, but it was. So white said, yep, you're right. But guess what? One of my knights is going to blockade you on c4, and that's going to be an isolated pawn, well blockaded. And you're not going to be too happy because your pieces are going to be tied down to defending that c pawn. They're going to be passive defenders. Pieces don't like to be passive defenders. They want to be active attackers. So knight e5 looks like a very good move. Now bishop to f8. It looks like a retreat, a pointless retreat, some might say. But it is not. It is not that at all. Okay, you have to do some calculations here, but it opens up the rook on the e file. And the rook is on the file that the queen is on. So let's get the bishop out of the way. Makes sense. h4. So what is this? Is he saying, I know you're going to play g6 and bg7. I know you, and I'm going to be able to play h5, attack you. Is that what's going on? I'm not sure. This next move looks indicative. If it can be played, the knight to d5, knight to d4 says, give up that big attacking bishop on b2, which is causing me some agita around that long diagonal. Yeah, I'll give you a pawn for that. Okay. Go ahead and take it. So white says, well, a pawn is a pawn after all. C takes, d4. Well, you can't very well play rook takes, can you? He doesn't even like queen takes. Now that's a super interesting move to me. Wow, queen d3 is not even what I was thinking about. I did not give that a second look. I was just going to take the pawn. But maybe the pawn wasn't capturable. Maybe there was something tactically wrong with it. But what do you do about queen takes queen? Knight takes, and you're saying, okay, I've got the knight in the ideal blockade position. And that pawn on d4 is going to be weak. I'm not going to fall for your cheap tactics. Oh my gosh. Very interesting. And a couple surprises for your commentator, Jim. But rook takes rook would, you can play rook takes rook. Because queen's under threat. You can't take the knight on e5. If you play queen takes queen, knight captures. If you play rook d2, can you play knight, a knight to b2 and just say, well, gosh golly, I am going to create a pass pawn on the queen side, which is going to be outside your little weakling of a pawn on d4. And I'm going to win all the endings. Doesn't matter which ending you choose. I'm winning all of them. Because I have an outside pass pawn and you don't. I don't know. I'm thinking that that's white's endgame strategy. Queen takes queen. I think knight takes d3 is forced. Play rook takes rook rook d2, then knight, a knight to b2. Looks like it holds everything. Maybe not. Maybe not. Looks like it. I just don't know. So, since I don't know, I'm gonna, oh, what has happened here? Let's go back to where we last left it. And it was rook f1. And I'm saying to myself, of course, because I'm listening, that this looks really bad for black. Watch this move, though. Jim wasn't considering this move. Bishop to c7. Can that be good? Can he just play f takes g6? Well, now he's black saying, well, then I'll take on g3. Get rid of one of your primary defenders. Ooh, can he really do that, though? I just don't know. I think yeah, he played it. And he recaptures. Now the queen is protecting the h7 pawn. So it's not just the knight. But you know what? There's two attackers on that knight. There's only one defender. Doesn't that look, oops, he plays rook to f3. The g rook to f3, getting the rook out of the way of the bishop on g7, piling up on that knight on f6, which is in a funny way pinned, because there is a potential mate on f8. Holy smokes. Well, there are some tactics in here, though. Well, that was a very clever defensive try. If it helps black to hold this position, I will be amazed. It won't be the first time that I've been amazed. But there's three attackers on that f6. Only one defender, and it can't move. That's a problem. And black is in a think now with 26 minutes left. He's got plenty of time to think it out. And he must have thought it out before he moved bishop to c7. But it was true, just going back to this position after f takes, there's no way he can play bishop takes g3 because scarfing up the rook, because of, I believe this is true, what I'm about to say, g pawn takes h7 check, because the knight can't take there. There's immediate mate on g7, so the king can't move to g7 or f8. has to move to F8, to H8, but then you take then F6. Bishop takes F6, check, which forces rook takes. And then you can play queen takes F6, checkmate. So, wisely, he played F takes. And then this looks to me to be a winning maneuver tactically. Even though Black is trying to do this defense from the side kind of idea, the rook on C6 defending along the 6th rank, the queen defending along the 7th, the other rook defending along the 8th. The sideways defense is facing an onslaught that is the bishops on D3, D4 pointing directly at the king's side, the doubled rooks on the F file. Oh, just coming in head first. Now, maybe Black is an Aikido master and is going to use your head first charge and defend from the side and make you pass by. That's possible, but I don't know. Rather be white. Okay. So we've come back to this position. And where do we leave off? I think with king h1. So knight c6, directing it back to d4 potentially. Queen g5. He says, okay, you're going to attack on the king side. I can see it coming. So I'm going to put my queen here, and I'm going to pin that bishop. So if you move that knight, you move that queen, maybe the e-pawn's going to fall. I'm not so sure it's such a good idea, but that's what he did. And h6 attacks it right away. So he says, okay, I'm going to keep my queen over on the king's side because I wanted the action to be on the queen's side. And you kind of forced me to get into a defensive mode on the king's side. And I think my queen's safe here, relatively. And it'll be putting, preventing you from making some obvious advances that you probably were thinking about. Okay, so now he says, all right, I'm just going to take my time, build the pressure. White is down now to under 8 minutes, under 7 minutes. Knight f to h4. Again, it looks like a pretty solid defensive setup, but he's got no real space, no kingside attacking prospects. And so Black just comfortably keeps coming. Knight c to e7. He's saying, I'm just taking my time because I can. Queen side is in my control. The center is in my control. The king side is where I have a big advantage. And yeah, you moved a few defenders over there, even though it took time. But I can take my time and keep moving my pieces over there faster than you can. Notice after all this action, we're on the move 30. The rook is still on a1. It's not really in the game. It has no easy way to get in the game. So this spatial exploitation by Black has been very pleasant to watch. The knight can't come into knight to e7 has prevented knight to g6, for example, move the rook off of the f file, which Black could use as a defensive resource, possibly. So that's a good move, and White has under 5 minutes now to think. So now the clock is ticking in your brain as well as in the clock. The tick, tick, tick of the clock is keeping you from concentrating fully on the position, unless your nerves are made of steel. Some competitors have nerves of steel, some do not. So, best wishes to Eric, but I'd rather be Black. Okay, so what's going on in this game? All right, so we're pretty much queen takes in this position after you play queen g3, he took, he recaptured, he came up with g6 because he wants to develop the bishop. He now has a choice of developing it either along the f8 to a3 diagonal or the f8 to h6 diagonal from h6 hitting c1. So that's probably going into his thinking. He could also play it to bishop to g7, which would, once the knight moves, defend that d pawn, that advanced d pawn, which is giving black a little bit of an edge in space, but it is an isolated pawn, subject to blockade, and the knight is blockading it, so it's subject to pressure. Pressure, pressure. He's got pressure. So, hard to say who's got the advantage in this game. Nick would probably tell me, but Nick had to leave because the Tuesday Night Marathon, which is a long-standing tradition at the Mechanics Institute of San Francisco, was underway. So they have their thing to do. Tom Langland, the president of Cal Chess, the state affiliate for the United States Chess Federation, is running this tournament. He's the tournament director. Tom is a FIDE arbiter, so he's not just some club director like I was. You know, he's got certification up the kazoo. So he can be the tournament director where norms are being acquired, where tournaments are being played to achieve those norms. Tom is in the seat of power. So that's the Cal Chess org. Scrolling across the bottom of your screen, that's how you can find out more about Cal Chess. Tom is the president of Cal Chess. And I also want to talk about this guy, Eve. He's got his own foundation. Look at that website. It's a beautiful website. And Philip Wharton is my tech guy, and he's created that website. And it won the Outstanding Chess website for the best chess website by the Chess Journalists of America gave us that award last year. And Philip has done a bang up job, just really incredible. So check out that website. Oh, by the way, there's a donate button if you want to give to what the Eve Foundation is doing. The Eve Foundation is, as you can see behind me, all over the world. And we've started chess communities all over the world by supplying them with chess equipment. When they could not afford to buy it themselves, we supplied it. And so we ask you to help us help them. Any donation of any amount is accepted and welcomed, and we would appreciate any of your help. Also, we wanted to shout out to Bay Area Chess, providing this space for this wonderful tournament in San Jose. Sorry, Solomon. San Jose is the home of the Bay Area Chess, and they're providing the facility, which anytime you're organizing a chess tournament, a facility is part of the process. You must find a place for play. The Mechanics Institute in San Francisco is a dedicated facility, and there are few and far between. That you can think of the Marshall in New York City. It's a dedicated facility for chess, but there aren't that many. So providing this facility to this tournament is a big part of why Mission 360 was able to pull it off. There's all sorts of other organizational challenges involved in putting this up. You have to have multiple federations support it. FIDE is the world governing organization for chess, and it has federations that you have to have a certain number of them represented in any IM or GM norm tournament. It can't just be US players only, for example. You can't just hold one where only French players can play. You have to invite other federations so they know there's no home cooking. And so you have to get these players, and we have one from China in this tournament, but that's part of the organizer's responsibility, and it's part of the TD's responsibility to double check the organizer's work. So, you know, Tom and Eric and everyone else involved in and I should put their scroll across the bottom of the screen now, Mission 360, and they are
doing the organizing, inviting the players, getting the players to play, that sort of thing. It's awfully nice when you can get it all working together, which they have done. So let me just bounce back a little bit. I'll leave that that scroll, or no, maybe I'll just should mention Chris Torres, who has been broadcasting the majority or most of the games, many of the games, I should say, because David Pruce, the international master, has also been broadcasting many of them, and I'm taking my turn to play today. And so this is one place you can find daily chess musings. And I'd invite you to do a daily Google search on daily chess musings, and you can find Chris everywhere in the Bay Area. He will be at tournaments, and he will post something daily. Man, I'm exhausted just thinking about it. He's doing a great job. He's also producing the Cal Chess Journal, the State of Magazine for Cal Chess. So Chris has many hands in the pie and is wearing many hats. And I am just wearing one. So I'm going to go back to the games, take a look at what's happening. And, oops. Gave a little shout out to the marshal there inadvertently. So we saw G6 and white has, we saw G6 and then white plays king to F3. Activate your kings in the endgame. And this is gone from the middle game stage is approaching the endgame stage. A couple more exchanges and you'll be in an endgame. So the king, which we kind of hid away, tucked away, king safety was a priority in the opening and middle game. But now it's getting closer to the end game. The king is a fighting piece. Activated. So king to F3 is a good move. Knight to D5. Now, it does accomplishes a couple of things. It gets out of the way so the bishop can come to G7 and protect that D pawn should it be attacked. And before I get back to finishing my thought, rook takes rook has occurred. Exchange has taken place on C8. And so now we're getting even closer to an ending, and this really is an ending. So knight E5 has been played. Interesting, because I was thinking in my little defensive-oriented move, rook D2, which would prevent the rook from getting to the seventh rank, the second rank in this case, but the seventh from Black's point of view. And then the rook would be active because you want to be behind pawns and attacking them from behind rather than in front of them and defending. So ideally, this white rook would be behind the d pawn instead of in front of it, because every time the d pawn advances, the scope of the rook decreases. And when its mobility decreases, its power decreases. But power of a piece is tied to its mobility. So that's why you like them behind, rooks especially behind the pawns, because every time a pawn advances, its scope increases, therefore its power increases. So put the rooks behind the pawns rather than in front of them, general school of thought. Now knight e5, what's knight e5 accomplishing? Well, the reason I'm pausing is because I'm not sure what it is accomplishing. Ooh, don't know. As I said, I would have played rook d2, but what is he trying to do? Well, the first thing that occurs to me is he is trying to take that d pawn. He's saying, if you want to play rook c2, go ahead. I'll take your d pawn. You take my a pawn. Huh. It's one way to go about it. You might be thinking king e4. But he has to be careful because that walks into knight c3 check. Knight takes knight. Pawn takes. And that pawn is further advanced. More advanced than you would like, generally speaking. So king e4, maybe not so much. And if there is something else underlying behind the knight to e5 idea, I confess I'm not seeing it. But it does open up the possibility of rook takes. Knight c3 is played anyways, which is a strong move. I think. But rook d4 can be played. I have to think about this a little bit more, but knight c3 looks like it's a forcing move. So I will give black some credit. Because, yeah, rook d4, knight takes knight, pawn takes knight. That's just too advanced. That's scary to me. I don't like to be scared. So I think rook takes is good. Now he can play bishop to g7, hitting the knight, pinning it to the rook. Can you protect the knight with king e? No, you can't go to king e4. Can you play rook to c4? He plays bishop to g7? I think you can. Thinking you can. Leaving yourself just a pawn up. So black's got to have something else up his sleeve here. Not sure. Could play knight takes a2, which will restore material equality. Might be the safest choice. Gee, I wish Nick was here, because I'm getting a headache. All right, let's look at back at the action on board 4. And black is still deep in thought. It looks to me. I don't see a proper defense to this. But I haven't seen a 1-0 go up. So I will come back to that. The position is not changed. And it doesn't look like the clocks are moving. So although I haven't seen a 1-0, I am going to speculate that black has resigned in this position. So our tournament leader suffers his first loss of a tournament. That allows other players to catch him. Interesting. Interesting. Final round results. And maybe what I'll do is refresh my screen, because that was my problem last time. I have to reload my browser. And let's look at round 9 again. Nope, still not seeing a 1 nothing. So let's go to this position. And where did we leave this? It looks like a few moves have been banged out. Let's see. E3. H4. This is where we left. Right? And he played knight c7, and that's where we left. Then he plays e3. What? E3? Okay. Not sure. E3 looks like he's trying for d4, but does that work? I don't think so. But knight b4 looks strong. It's attacking that pawn twice. If you take it with the knight, it gets pinned. You can play at that point e4, protecting it, and then maybe c4, protecting it again. So, white. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what to do. He plays d4. Okay, I would have said it's not possible, but he did it. He takes d4. He takes d4. And he doesn't capture. Okay, because it is pinned. It can't take d takes c5 because the bishop on g7 would take on b2. Very well. Why not just recapture? Why not just win the pawn? I don't know. Maybe there's something I'm not paying attention to. But some other moves have been played. Let's look at them. Queen f3. Well, I would just take it in a heartbeat, and he does. And now he recaptures. So now there's 2 attackers and 2 defenders. Did black just lose an opportunity to win a pawn? No, not necessarily. Ooh. Knight to d3. Where does the bishop go? Ah, he says, I'll pin your knight. Your pawn to your knight. Does it? Does it really? I'm not so sure. And b4. Whoa, that's embarrassing. Take your bishop. He says, yeah, go ahead. I'll take your knight. Ooh. Now, isn't that interesting? Isn't that special? He does take, and he does take. He plays knight c6 again. And the idea here is pawn takes c5, a2. How do you stop that pawn from queening? Ooh. Because you're thinking, look at the mess. The pawns are all a mess. Just messy pawns everywhere. But it's advanced and messy. The pawn on a3 is threatening a2, a1. Uh-oh. So I better do something about that. And rook a1 looks indicated. Fine move. Knight b4 says, okay, where are you going to put your rook? Now I'm attacking again. And I'm going to be able to support a2. Which, incidentally, is going to be uncomfortable for you. Says, okay, I see it coming. Maybe I can take the pawn, give up the exchange for knight and pawn, and maybe bail out somehow. I'm not sure. Knight f4. That's our position. And white only has 3 minutes left, and black has an hour. So black still seems to be sitting kind of pretty. I'm looking at pawn takes pawn right now. But maybe knight e6 is the answer to that. Maybe that's not so smart. Okay. So black has time to think this through. More time than I do. Okay, and action here on board 2. Okay, he did take on a2. After rook takes d4, which we saw, he did play knight takes a2, which seems sufficient to restore material balance. Rook to d7 also looks good. It's attacking the f7 pawn. I'm attacking the a7 pawn. I'm going to win a pawn. Aren't I? Oh, okay. You're thinking you're going to win a pawn. Well, I'm going to win 2. You can have that 1. Sorry about that. Incoming call. Okay. So it looks like white is going to be a pawn up, but the pawns are all on the king side. And so often, 3-on-2 on the king side is insufficient to win. But I don't know whether that's true or not in this particular case. I just don't know. He plays knight to g5.
noticed that I was muted. I don't know how long that has been going on. I don't know if I muted myself, but I was muted for a large portion of this broadcast. I am so sorry about that. And I just noticed that there was a you're muted button that I didn't pay any attention to. So what I was saying was that the E Foundation is a charitable organization dedicated to building communities through chess. And wherever you are, doesn't matter what country you live in, doesn't matter what language you speak, we're here to help you join the chess community. Sometimes people have the desire to play chess, but not the ability to buy the equipment. There are places that cannot join the chess community because they do not have the resources to help themselves. So the E Foundation gives them those resources, and they make them form a community wherever they are, whatever country they're in, whatever language they speak. It just doesn't matter. So our charitable organization is 501c3, so you can take your donations to the Foundation off of your taxes. That is not the primary purpose to give to the Foundation. The primary purpose is to help us help them wherever they are, wherever they live, whatever community they're building. Help them build a community through chess. And it's a gift that lasts a lifetime. You teach the chess to young, and it can last a lifetime because it's an educational tool. And when they're young, and the lessons they learn are life lessons. To sit still and think, to postpone immediate gratification, these are the life lessons, and they're directly transferable back into the classroom. You see this time and again when you introduce the chess program, the standardized test scores go up. People perform better. Parents have noticed that, so they push their administrators to get a chess program started. There was an explosion that I observed starting in the 1990s and continues to this day. The scholastic chess environment is just wonderful in the United States, and we want to care not only about the United States, but about the world itself. And there are things that go on in the world that we have no control over. I'm wearing yellow and blue today because we have no control over what's going on in Ukraine now. But our hearts can be with them. We can give them our support and think of them, because that suffering could be ours if circumstances were different. And it just doesn't matter what country you're from, what language you speak. If you play chess, you're part of a chess community. This chess community spans time zones. So as you get older, you can go, the lessons you've learned in chess will never leave you. You can apply them as you're adult, whatever career path is yours to take. It just doesn't matter. You continue to learn, to apply those lessons that you have learned. So even in Solus, when you get to be my age, where you're adult and you have aches, you're in illness and injury, and all of a sudden you have doctor's bills and hospital appointments, and if you're playing chess, you're not thinking about any of those things. So let's get back to the games, back to the action, and look at what's going on here. Okay, so where did we leave off? We left off at knight took on a6, the bishop took on d4, the rook took on a2, the rook took on b3, rook a to c2, and then black played an interesting and good move. I say this without really analyzing, but f4, because that f pawn is isolated, weak, and now you're saying, okay, let's just exchange it. And I just don't think you have enough. You're not going to let me push f3, f2, f1, are you? I don't think so. So what does white do? He takes. Yeah, I don't want to do that. And whoa, he throws in rook to b1 check. Hey, where'd that come from? We weren't thinking about that. King g2's forced. Rook takes f4. So now he's saying, hey, you know what? I can check you on g1. You're kind of running out of squares, aren't you? Ooh, this is dastardly. There are threats still. We said it was an ending, but there's still threats. And poor white, poor Eric Lee, He's only got about 2 minutes left to figure these threats out. Are they real or are they just kind of phony threats? The kind we've seen so often. Because phony threats can be scary. Now rook d3 was played. Is rook d3 sufficient? Because rook to g1 would force king to h3. Now what the defensive idea here following rook d3 is rook to g3 check would force the exchange of rooks. Now 2 rooks and a bishop and the king trapped on the side of the board. That's scary. Darn tootin' it's scary. But if you trade one of them off, all of a sudden the mating threats aren't too scary. So this idea of rook g3 check might be the defensive resource that white needs. But notice now the rooks are no longer doubled. So a move like a simple move, like rook a1, can scarf up that a pawn. He throws that in to drive the king to the side of the board, making mating possibilities a real thing. Not a pretend thing, a real thing. Okay. H3 was forced, so Eric got 30 seconds of time back that he needed it. Got him over 3 minutes now. Why did I miss that? Bishop to f2 exclam. Threatening. Rook h4 check. Is there an answer? Rook g3 is answered by bishop takes now. Not rook takes, but bishop takes. Whoa, good move. Does he force the win of the exchange? And with material so reduced, is that sufficient winning chances? All of these questions are unanswered. But we will see the answers that white and black decide to give us. In this particular game, how is it going to end? Now you can throw a rook to d8 check in, but to what purpose? It serves none. So, I would think rook takes bishop, or rook g3 have to be considered. Oh, this is a dynamite move. Bishop to f2, threatening mate. With all of this reduction of material, were there mating threats? Yes. Does this win black the exchange? I think so. White is down to 1 minute and 20 seconds now. He had 3 when he started thinking. He's got to come up with the right answer. How do I draw this position now? I don't know. I will quickly take a look at the other active games, which I think there's only one. This one. Okay. 3 against 3. The white rook is much more mobile, much more powerful than the black rook. The knight on a4 is pretty far out of the game. The knight on b3, pretty far out of the game. And bishop is on a long diagonal. Looks pretty powerful. Looks like a good piece. So, does black try to save that h-pawn? Can he save that h-pawn? I don't know. Okay, we'll go back and say that if it's just 3-on-2, often black has sufficient on the king side, all the pawns connected. the drawing chances are still pretty promising. It has to be some other combination of things that will end up allowing the 3 pawns to win. And this is, you know, some of those positions are drawn and some of them are won. It takes a great player playing great moves to decide it. Check back on board 1. Okay. He's saying, what did we miss here? He played bishop f2. He did take it. Kind of a good move, I think. He could have done something else, but I think that was a good move. I don't know for sure. And rook takes, and then knight c7. Now, what I'm afraid of is he's going to play like rook to a1 and take that h pawn, which would handily increase Black's winning chances. So he's won the exchange. Can't defend that h pawn. Does he have the ability to play a6? And obviously, if he gets a7 in, then he can queen and get the exchange back. If nothing else. I mean, maybe he can win an entire rook for the pawn. But Black probably has time to defend against that. Very tough. Black has plenty of time to think this out. White is down to 35 seconds. So every move you get 30 seconds, so it's not as dire as it might seem. But it doesn't have time for a deep think. Maybe not even rook h1, rook to g2, g rook to g2. So the king is trapped in the corner still to the side of the board. And rook takes, h2 will be check. It's a head scratcher. Causing the anxiety just looking at it. So I don't see the 1-0, but I'm pretty sure white won on board 4. And back here, we're still in a deep think after knight h3. Black has 19 minutes left and white has 16 minutes, so time is not of the essence here. Okay. This gives me the opportunity to talk a little bit about all of the hands that had to be there to help this kind of tournament take place. Returning IM and GM norm tournaments to the Bay Area, it's a wonderful thing to see. It gives the kids, I call them kids because everyone who's younger than me is a kid, and they have the opportunity, they're very young, they're very strong, to achieve norms. And they don't have to go to the East Coast, to Europe, to get them. They can get them right here in the San Francisco Bay Area. This tournament is being held in San Jose. San Jose is it's a growing city, and it's becoming between San Jose and San Francisco is really referred to as Silicon Valley. There's so much talent out here in so many different diverse areas, and let's bring the chess game back. We have the Mechanics Institute in San Francisco that has put on many IM and GM norm tournaments, many IM norm tournaments, many FIDE futurities to get local players FIDE ratings. Now FIDE has changed its rating policy, and so now you can get lower ratings. But the time that I was playing, you had to have a 2200 rating to get FIDE rated, and so there weren't that many that were able to achieve a 2200 FIDE rating because there weren't that many FIDE rated players. So now it's changed a great deal. FIDE ratings have been lowered, so there's more. It's much more easy to attract FIDE rated players to your tournaments. Any kind of tournament, FIDE ratings are not uncommon now, but it's different to have a FIDE rating than a FIDE title. Now, if you maintain a FIDE rating of 2300 for 24 games, at least that's the way it was, you get the FM title, which is the title I got. My highest FIDE rating was 2340, and I didn't maintain it there. It was more like 2320, but it was over 2300 for over 24 games, and I earned a FIDE title. The next title is much more difficult to obtain because you have a couple of requirements, not just the rating, which is what you needed for the FM. You need to be 2400 FIDE in order to get the IM title, but you also need to achieve it in norms against other title players. You didn't have to have a norm to get the FM title, but you did to get it the IM title. And there were the opportunities for this was few and far between. So we've just seen bishop to e5 being played in this ending. It seems to be allowing rook takes a7. He is preventing knight f4, though. The crippling of the white pawn structure would just about do away with any winning chances. So he's giving up the a-pawn, preventing knight f4. And the a-pawn is snatched up, which it should have been. So what's black up to now? How's black going to try to answer various threats? So, interesting. Oh, white is trying very hard to win this. And Kostya has many fans in the Bay Area. I learned that from Chris Torres. Chris Torres of the Daily Chess Musings. And I think that the fans were... Okay, rook e6. Now, this is interesting. He's saying, I don't want you to attack on my g6 pawn via f4. So I took that away with bishop e5. I don't want you attacking it along the 6th rank. So I'm going to take that away from you. Now, the drawback, every chess move except for checkmate has pluses and minuses. And the minus in this position is that the rook on a7 is trapping the king to the back rank. So the king cannot centralize, it cannot advance. Not that you need to centralize, because all the action is left on the king side now. 3 pawns against 2. It's going to be hard to make that a decisive advantage, but there's no question that white has the advantage. Now, of the pieces, the bishop on e5 looks like the strongest, but that can change. So now, would black try to get his knight into the game somehow, some way? I would say I would. So rook to b7, attacking the knight. Not sure why, because the knight wants to come back into the king side anyways. Is there something I'm overlooking? I would have... Oh, the other thing that the rook to e6 does is it took away the b6 square for the knight. So that knight couldn't move. So this move opens up the possibility of moving the knight. And it could play rook to b6 now. And if he trades off the rooks, his winning chances are improved because the rooks are like drawing machines. They're so powerful. So this rook is not moving to b7 to attack the knight so much as it is to prepare rook to b6. Because the rook can't avoid the exchange because the g-pawn would be hanging. And the king can't come up, still trapped on the back rank. So, and you don't want to play bishop to d4, for example, because that allows the knight f4, which is what black is trying to prevent. So it's a good move. At first it took me by surprise. Oh, so good answer. Holy cow. Good answer. As we pointed out just a minute ago, the knight has no squares to go to. Now it can go to b6, but then knight c5 makes it very uncomfortable for the rook and knight. The rook has no place to maintain the defense. It's under attack. So knight b6 is still out. So taking and taking is indicated. So black has been able to reduce some more material. Now, if you trade all the pieces off, the king and pawn ending might be won. But if you keep on a rook and a bishop versus rook and a knight, it's still, black still has drawing chances here. And they're actually, they're pretty good drawing chances. So he wants to put the question to the bishop. Where do you want to go, bishop? This is interesting positional play, trying to squeeze an ending with just a small material advantage on board 2. Let's look back at board 1. Okay, so let's see where we dropped off. I think it was here with knight c7. So let's look at the moves that were actually played. c4 attacks the rook. What are you gonna do? c3, rook c3. Okay. How about rook f5? Hey, guess what? I'm threatening rook takes. Rook 2 h5. Checkmate. Oh man, these mate threats, they keep surfacing with such a reduction of material on the board. He says, okay, I'll take your pawn, because if you play rook check, I'll just play rook to h4. You don't have checkmate, buddy. You got problems of your own. Since black says, yeah, you're right. Okay, I'll take your a pawn. So now we're just left with h pawns, rook pawns. Notoriously difficult to win. Either with king and rook versus king and rook pawn, king and pawn versus king and pawn, rook pawn. Smell on a draw, but black does have the exchange. Can he make use of that in this position with the material so reduced? Check, check. I'm not going to take, am I? That looks weird to me, what just happened. He gave up his h-pawn for no apparent reason. Certainly didn't have to do that. He had plenty of time to think, so he must know something I don't. Oh, I see. Where does the knight go? There. And that is threatening. If he plays king e7, for example, the knight wins the rook with knight c6 check. So if he wants to give pressure, he's got to play that, king g7. Or he could have played king e8, but king g7 looks stronger. Now, the white rook could go to h4, for example, but then look at this. Rook e3 check is mate. What else can white do? Holy smokes. This was deep thinking on black's part. I can't believe it. Yeah, white's going to lose on time. Good job, black. Oh, no, he got 30 seconds. Okay. Played king h4. Of course, king h4. Anybody would have played that. So it's not over, is it? What about king takes? Because king takes rook can be answered by knight to f7 check. This position keeps surprising me. So he plays rook to d1, attacking the knight. So both the rook and the knight are under attack. Yowzer. They keep finding ways to let the other guy go wrong. The other guy keeps going right. Can he play rook e5? here. And he does. Does this save it? No. I don't know. Shouldn't say no. I just don't know. I no longer know. Can he play King G3 here? Okay, he's got 52 seconds now, so banging off these moves has seemed to have made his position more tenable. But looks like Rook G5 check, followed by Rook takes knight, could be winning. Unless there's another surprising move in here that I haven't seen. I think that's winning. Yep. King F3, Rook takes knight. 2 rooks versus rook and pawns, hopeless. Sorry to say. That's a check, but sorry. It's hopeless. That's just too much material. What a game by Black. Just when I thought White had squiggled out, he slammed the trap shut again. Yep. Oh, well done, Black. Good fight, Eric. Very proud of you. Okay, so Black, this game is the last game remaining. And after this, I will sign off. But this game could go on for a long time. The bishop is superior to the knight, but all the action is going to be on the king's side now. So once the knight gets over there, it should be pretty good. But the rook is just setting up a defensive barrier. Keep the king and the rook on g6. You can't win it. Okay. And if you advance f3 to g4, that just further reduces it to a 2-on-1 advantage, which is even harder to win. Oh, this could go on for a long time, folks. And I might have to sign off. Gossi is just going to keep trying to squeeze every drop that he's got out of this position. But Leonid, I think, is a veteran defender. Probably won't fall for any little traps. Oh, don't see the way that we make progress here. But that's just me. So some great chess has been played. Looking at the two, I still want to see that 1-0 for Balaji. Great win. Fantastic win. Let's just replay that game. Okay. The opening is a Sicilian that's been played 1,000 times according to Grandmaster Nick DeFernman. And so it's not something that I would play, and I don't really pretend to have any expertise. The king to h1 looks a little funny, but he wants to play f4. And so you don't want that king on the g1 to a8 diagonal, because then you'd be subject to knight takes, d4 followed by bishop to c5, and uh-oh, you're in a world of hurt. So bishop e7's normal development. f4 is what Black had intended, or White had intended all along, so it's very consistent. And d6 is putting up this modern formation of pawns. Takes away the b5 square, c5, d5, e5, and f5. It says you can't put your pieces on any of those squares. So how are you going to make progress? So it's a little bit, it's not aggressive, but it's structurally sound. And we have found, and as defenders with black, structurally sound is often good enough. Bishop to e3, it obviously belongs there, and might as well put it there. King safety is an issue, so king castles. But white is going to say, I want to attack on the king, so I'm glad to know your king's there. And plays e1, rook, queen to e1, so that the queen can transfer to the king side. Because white has his eye on the king, on the castle king. He knows it's there. It's not going away anytime soon. I've got a spatial advantage because his pawns are on d6 and e6. Mine are on e4 and f4. So I'm attempting to control these contested squares, d5, e5, f5, and even g5. And they are all in black's territory, not white's. So white has a spatial advantage. How do you exploit a spatial advantage? You have easier movement from your pieces can move from one side of the board to the other more easily than your opponents can. The person without the space has the tendency to have their pieces trip over one another trying to get to the right squares. So it's advantage in space turns into an advantage in time, which you want to make a permanent advantage by winning material. So taking the knight on d4 is pretty common, according to Nick. Bishop takes on d4, so now it's well posted to attack the king side. It's got a nice square on d4. So b5 is black's attempt to remind white that if you're going to be moving all your pieces to the king side, I can cause some trouble on the queen side for you. And white says, okay, let's slow you down. You can't play b4 right away. I know you want to, can't. So bishop to b7 puts the bishop on a nice diagonal, attacks the e4 square. It looks like you can take it, can't you? Well, no, I'll offer you to take it. Go ahead and take it. Because if you play bishop takes pawn, knight takes pawn, knight takes, I will play queen g7 check. Mate. So that pawn is not hanging, it's just there for bait. Please take it, please take it, please take it. No, I won't. I'll play rook c8. Consistent with my queenside theme. And so, I'm expecting that knight to move and I'm going to take that c pawn, but white says, no, you're not. Playing bishop d3, guarding the e pawn and the c2 pawn. So you got nothing on the queen side while I go about my business on the king side. So this bishop to c6 move was interesting to me. I thought he was going to play queen d7 to follow up with additional pressure on e4 and then be able to play a5 and b4 and get some action going on the queen side. But white just ignores that. So it's okay. I'll bring another defender into the game, into the center of the board. Obviously it's protecting the e-pawn, but it might shift to the rook e3 and rook over, the rook left. Oh my goodness, a rook left. And it might advance the pawn to e5. If that works out for white, white can do it anytime he wants. So queen b8, which unbeknownst to me, it's a good place for it. Apparently, it's a good place for it. Then this shouldn't be a shocker because it's thematic in so many Sicilians. This knight d5 sacrifice, pseudo sacrifice, is often crying out to be played because it opens up lines against the black king. And once those lines get open, they're awfully hard to close. So I'm attacking your bishop on e7. I'm going to take it. What are you going to do? If you don't want to take my knight, what are you going to do? And he says, best way to refute a sacrifice is to accept it. Okay. But now your bishops are both under attack. Which one do you want to save? And he says, well, I think I'm going to save this one. Okay. Then I'll just take this one. Okay. Then I'll recapture. So now the material is even, but white has two bishops versus bishop and knight, which is considered and rightly so, an advantage. They're not just two bishops. Look at how they're placed on d3 and d4. Oh my goodness. That is so scary. And to top it all off, you've got a isolated pawn on d6, so your pawn structure is worse than white's. He's got the two bishop, you've got worse pawn structure. Oh my goodness. I don't like black's game. I like white's game. Queen h3. Oh, his immediate threat is bishop takes f6 and queen takes h7. Ouch. Gotta do something about that. g6. Okay, you stopped it, but you know what you did? You also loosened the dark squares around your king, which I am going to emphasize with queen h6. The dark squares around your king are awfully loose. He plays d5, which is a good move. Is it sufficient to hold? You know, maybe he can play at some point in time in the future, 94, you know, just to block everything off, but I don't know. I don't know. So he plays rook f3, which I think is just immediately winning. That's the kind of guy I am. I'm thinking he's immediately winning. He's going to play rook h3 and bishop takes f6. What's to stop it? Plays queen to c8, which I thought was, you know, okay, I'm going to play rook h3 anyways. But white plays f5 instead, puzzling me. Why not play rook h3? But we haven't talked about that. We're not going to talk about it because that was just my thinking. My thoughts were not important. The chess players' thoughts were. And f5 is a good move, no question about it. Even if it's second best, it's pretty darn good. So queen d7. Now he's going to try to this defense from the side kind of strategy. Now I'm saying the queen was on b7 before. It didn't have to move and defend from the side twice. It had to move twice to get there. No, come on. How is it better on b8 than b7? But anyways, that's just me again. Grumpily saying why my moves would have been better. But rook g3 looks like a promising move. Still don't see what's wrong with rook h3, but promise not to talk about that. Rook e8 looks forced. Give the king some chance of, or white some chance of going wrong, but he doesn't. He plays rook f1 and says, okay, what do you got? How are you going to organize your defense? You don't have time for very much organization. Plays bishop to c7, which removes the defender from f6, which is questionable in my mind right away, but I'm not sure how he defends. I might have tried queen e7, hoping for queen f8 to trade the queens or force the queen to retreat. But bishop c7 was played. The rook is attacked. Does he care? No. He says, I'm going to mate you if you take it. So he says, okay, I see that. He says, oh my goodness, I'm going to attack your knight. And guess what? The knight can't move because there's a rook check to f8 that would lead to mate. The knight's paralyzed, pinned, but it's attacked 3 times, defended only once. You're losing it. Wonderful game, Balaji. Wonderful, wonderful game. Classic attacking game. So we've got almost all the games are over. I now see that long-awaited 1-0 on board 4. Good job, Balaji. Good job, Josiah Sternman. That's a nice win on board 1, and you had an outstanding tournament. I hope you got everything you wanted from the tournament. You played very, very well. So this position has changed just a little bit since we were last year. Okay. We had seen h5, knight e4. Bishop e7 was played after knight e4. Bishop e7, knight d2. What's he doing? Rook a1, a4. Rook b6 check, king f7, guarding the g-pawn. As long as they guard the g-pawn, I should be okay. Rook c6, what are you doing? Not sure. Rook a5. You know, so just some maneuvering around, probing for weaknesses. Whereas Larry Christensen once told me, in endings where you have an advantage, just torture your opponent. see what they can do. And I think that, you know, this is part of the strategy here. Just keep moving, making moves, making those little threats here and there, and see if your opponent goes wrong. But so far, black is consistently good. Okay, now that the f pawn is advanced, the g pawn for black cannot move up. But if the g pawn for white moves up, then the pawns become isolated, unable to defend themselves, and the drawing chances go up. So f4 is committal, very committal. But you know, rook goes back. He says, "All right, if the king comes around, you know, I'm just going to keep checking it." So king goes to h3 and says, "I'm going to hide from those checks." So it says, "What are you going to do, though?" "Okay, I'm going to pin your rook, your bishop." Sorry. So rook c7 is where it stands now. Both players had plenty of time. I don't know. I don't see white's winning strategy here, I confess. Doesn't mean there isn't one, but I just can't see it. Now king f8. Interesting. It's almost a little taunting. It's like, you know, I can just move anywhere I want. What are you going to do? But here we are. Just replying to a message. I'm going to check to see if Tom has given me any more updates. Oops, it didn't work. That was not what I meant. I meant Messenger, yes. That was Robert's 5th IM norm, and he broke 2400. So me and Chris Bird have some paperwork to do. That means that Robert is going to get his IM title. All right. So this has produced 1 IM norm. Wonderful job, tournament organizers, once again. Not sure what the maneuvering is all about here, but I don't have to be sure. It's not my job to be sure. It's just my job to broadcast the game. But if it has no consequences, I am going to bid you adieu pretty soon. I'm going to hang in there for another couple of moves. But to tell you the truth, I'm getting a little hungry. And I just may not be able to hang around much longer. But let's look again. Okay, yeah, this is just maneuvering. I don't see much point to it. So we have one game going on. On board 1, Josiah Sternman won a brilliant game. Eric Lee put up dour defense, really strong defensive chances, and he tried, but he just eventually had to, and he was under time pressure. He had no time to do a deep think towards the end of the game, and he came up with one after another creative way to continue the game, but eventually was worn down. And Balaji on board 4, brilliant game, great attacking game, overcame all the defensive resources of the tournament leader going into this round. So very good action. And this last game is going to be a maneuvering type of game that I do not see. Okay, f5 is a break, but that leaves the g and h pawn. Just don't see the winning chances. It'll be a 2-on-1 game, but the g4 pawn, if the g4 pawn advances and is taken, the chances of winning a rook and a pawn ending, even if it's the pawn up, it's a rook pawn, man. Yeah, you don't have a lot of ways to win those games. A rook pawn and a rook ending, pure rook ending, it's a draw. King ending is a draw. Rook and knight versus rook and bishop, I don't know. I would assume it's a draw. So we'll see. just don't think there's any way, any conceivable way for white to win this. It doesn't mean white can't. It just means that I can't see it. Perfectly reasonable. That up pawn is going to disappear one way or the other. Okay. And obviously king takes to protect the h-pawn. And again, I'll just say one more time, if the knight and bishop are traded, that's not a winnable ending for white. It's a draw. Unless there's some trick here that I'm not considering. But I will take this opportunity to bid you good night. I think it's been a wonderful tournament. Great to be part of it. Really enjoyed myself. Don't see any progress being made here, and it would be pointless for me to not go and eat. So thank you for being here. I appreciate it. And I'll just say goodbye to everybody in my typical way, which is to say goodbye.